herzlich hier im neuen Museum begrüßen und ganz herzlich zu Hause an den Bildschirmen. Ich freue mich sehr, dass wir uns heute und die nächsten 3 Tage zu dieser Fachtagung treffen. Es ist eine ganz besondere Tagung, die wir hier haben, die einhergeht oder die Krönung ist von einem Prozess, der jetzt über 4 Jahre gut ging, in denen sich verschiedene Akteure mit der Kunst im öffentlichen Raum beschäftigt haben. Das waren maßgeblich oder das sind maßgeblich initiiert vom Bau- und Planungsreferat hier der Stadt Nürnberg. Das ist die Kunsthalle Nürnberg und hier das neue Museum. Es sind 2 Ausstellungen entstanden, eine Publikation und jetzt eben zum Abschluss auch noch diese Tagung. Das Ganze ging als Prozess los im Rahmen der Bewerbung als Kulturhauptstadt Nürnbergs und es ist das Projekt, das darüber hinaus eben auch Spuren hinterlässt und ich glaube auch gerade mit dieser Tagung nochmal eine ganz andere Tiefe und Dimension erreicht. Ich möchte gleich am Anfang begrüßen und mich bedanken bei dem Bau- und Planungsreferenten Herrn Ulrich, der das initiiert hat, mit angestoßen hat, mitgetragen hat, zusammen mit seinem Kollegen Andreas Wissen, der zuständig ist für die Kunst im öffentlichen Raum und hier ganz wichtige Impulse gesetzt hat. Ich bedanke mich herzlich bei Ellen Seifermann, die jetzt in dem letzten Jahr auch vor allen Dingen sehr, sehr viel in dieses Projekt hineingesteckt hat. Und meine Vorgängerin Eva Kraus, freue ich mich sehr, dass sie heute da ist. Und komm doch bitte auch nach vorne und setz dich. Mittlerweile ist sie Intendantin an der Bundeskunsthalle in Bonn. Und ich weiß es sehr zu schätzen, dass sie sich die Zeit nimmt, heute hier bei uns zu sein. Das zeigt, wie wichtig ihr das ist. Und eben durch den Weggang von Eva Kraus kam es eben auch, dass hier Kräfte umverteilt worden sind. Und ich danke allen, die das aufgefangen haben. Denn auch wenn ich jetzt hier vorne stehe, ich habe mit dem Projekt gar nichts zu tun. Ich bin die glückliche Nutznießerin und freue mich sehr auch, dass Jörg Heiser eingestiegen ist in das Projekt und uns heute, wir werden das erleben, wichtige Akzente gesetzt hat, wie jetzt auch die Tagung ausgerichtet ist. Ich darf ganz herzlich alle Referentinnen und Referenten, alle Künstlerinnen und Künstler begrüßen, die heute auch schon angereist sind und die diese Tagung maßgeblich prägen. Uns erwartet ein sehr vielseitiges Programm. Von unserem Haus aus sehen Sie direkt, wenn Sie hier aus dem Auditorium rausgehen, Audit, die Ausstellung, die den Anfang gemacht hat und die auch eigentlich den Grundstein legt für diese ganze Diskussion. 1971 fand hier in Nürnberg das Symposion Urbanum im Rahmen des Dürerjahres statt und war etwas ganz Neues in seiner Art. Initiiert von Karl Prantl und Hans-Fried Defet, also einem Künstler und einem Galeristen, wurden hier internationale Künstler eingeladen, vor Ort in Nürnberg Skulpturen im öffentlichen Raum zu realisieren. Und das war in dieser Fülle tatsächlich neu und vor allen Dingen haben die Künstler und Künstlerinnen das neu begriffen, dass sie aus dem Stadtzentrum hinausgingen, auch in die einzelnen Stadtteile und eben einen Demokratisierungsprozess eigentlich anstoßen wollten, um Kunst dort zu bringen, wo vielleicht das Publikum fern ist. Was sie dabei nicht bedacht haben, ist, dass so etwas vielleicht auch begleitet und vermittelt werden muss. Das ist in der Euphorie und damals auch im Diskurs noch anders bewertet worden. Was auch dann sicherlich überraschend war, waren die Reaktionen auf diese Kunst und auf die Konfrontation mit vor allen Dingen ungegenständlicher Kunst im öffentlichen Raum. Und das haben wir in dieser Ausstellung sehr genau aufgearbeitet. Harte Text. Es gab wirklich Attacken auf diese Kunstwerke, es gab verbale Attacken, medial, Leserbriefe, aber dann auch wirklich an den Werken direkt. Das war etwas, was sich dann über die Jahre eben auch fortgesetzt hat. Wir haben das dann auch nochmal aufgegriffen mit der legendären Aktion von Olaf Metzl. Brauche ich gar nicht mehr groß in Erinnerung rufen, was das in Nürnberg an Folgen und an Diskussionen nochmal ausgelöst hat, viele Jahre später. Seifermann hat das in ihrer Ausstellung dann weitergeführt. Sie hat den Ball aufgegriffen, was heißt eigentlich Kunst im öffentlichen Raum heute? Was sind die Fragestellungen, was sind die Themen, was gibt es für unterschiedliche Arten von Künstlerinnen auf den öffentlichen Raum zu reagieren? Und interessant ist eben, dass dieser Demokratisierungsprozess, der mit dem Symposium Urbanum gewollt wurde, eine Frage komplett ausgeblendet hat, nämlich die Erinnerungskultur. Die Künstler, die damals angetreten sind, haben ausschließlich unegenständlich gearbeitet. Es ging ihnen um Wahrnehmungsfragen. Es ging ihnen um eine neue Art von Kunstbegriff, den sie etablieren wollten. Sie haben auf den Raum reagiert, an dem sie diese Skulpturen aufgestellt haben, aber sie haben gerade in Nürnberg, und das ist das Fallbeispiel und die Hintergrundfolie auch für unsere heutige Tagung, haben sie eben nicht auf das Reichsparteitagsgelände eben beispielsweise reagiert und sind nicht auf die Historie eingegangen. Und heute stehen wir jetzt an dem Punkt, dass wir uns eben fragen, wie kann man denn erinnern und wie kann denn das eigentlich gehen? Also 1971 wollte man sich lossagen von der traditionellen Denkmal-Mahnmalkultur des 19. Jahrhunderts und heute stehen wir an dem Punkt, dass wir uns fragen, wie kann man denn das eigentlich machen? Wie kann man integrieren? Wie kann man partizipative Projekte anleiten und solche Impulse geben? Und ich bin sehr gespannt, was wir im Rahmen dieser Tagung alles erfahren und hören werden. Und ich freue mich sehr und finde das sehr besonders, dass eine Stadt diesen Prozess eben anleitet. Wie ich eben schon sagte, 1971 war die Initiative von Künstlern und einem Galeristen ausgegangen. Heute geht die Initiative von den Institutionen und der Stadt selber aus, von der Stadtplanung. Wie gehen wir damit um? Wie können wir das sinnvoll in unseren öffentlichen Raum integrieren? Und ich finde, dass das Nürnberg ganz vorbildlich macht und möchte da auch ganz explizit mich nochmal bei Ihnen, Herr Ulrich und Herrn Wissen, bedanken, dass Sie solche Prozesse so eben fördern und jetzt eben auch so eine Reflexionsebene in den ganzen Prozess einbezogen haben mit der Tagung. Jetzt wünsche ich Ihnen allen anregende 3 Tage. Hinweise zum Umgang mit Masken.
When it comes to the mask, I do need to say that we have to
auch im Sitzen müssen Sie aufbehalten
rules in Germany, meaning that even if you're seated, you have to keep your masks on. Wherever you're in the building, please keep your mask on. But here we are sitting in the cellar. But you can also go outside, get some light, get some fresh air, and have a look at the exhibits, even the other exhibits that are not immediately related to public health. Also from my side, I would like to welcome you. Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you for receiving us here at this wonderful location, at this wonderful museum where we like to talk about public art and public spaces. This time it was not a sponsor or a private individual who made the initiative. This time it was actually the city of Nuremberg that sat down and thought about how art can be presented and which effects it can have in the public spaces, what it's supposed to be and what function it is supposed to fulfill. We wanted to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first Symposium Urbanum in 1971, which is an art event that was important for the art world. The goal is to have a look at public art the way we understand it today and how we can integrate it into a living city. It could be a bit more difficult now than 50 years ago because the idea of what art is different. And we will see during this event that it's not always about just putting up a bronze sculpture somewhere randomly in town and talk about it, but it's also about the process of how the object or a non-object is formed and how it interacts with the place it is in and how people interact with it. And these are very important factors. In Nuremberg, we've made a great effort to see art and public art not as an isolated phenomenon, but something that is an integrative part of our municipal or city development. So that's why it is very important that we take up all of the traces and all of the elements that we have had in the past year, so we know where we're at right now and where we want to move towards in the future. There was, for example, a resolution where it was defined that a certain amount of money would be invested into public art. It was not defined what art or how exactly, but there was a budget for public art. So we are using the planning and building budget with a very exact goal of having public art, thinking of how we can enrich our city with public art. And if we look at these debates, we can, for example, see the new sculpture at the Nelson Mandela Platz. We have an acrylic block with a diamond inside, and we had many voices in the media who were very, very interested in knowing when the first person is going to try to steal this diamond. But you know that an acrylic block is quite impossible to destroy and to extract the diamond, so it's quite safe, but you know that you can vandalize it. So they asked whether putting up a diamond in an acrylic block in that part of town was a correct decision or not. But then we also have some other sculptures around town that are being vandalized, and that's why people ask whether they could really put it up. And then we have a very simple acrylic block on the Nelson Mandela square, and it looks very fragile. And is this the right place to put up a sculpture or not? So we have to ask ourselves, what can art do? What should art do? And these are the questions that we're going to have a look at in these next 3 days. We're also going to talk about the culture of commemoration, which is something that is always has to be reinvented here in Nuremberg. It is a question that has been quite present for quite a number of years here, and that we always have to look at from different perspectives. So what we're doing here is part of that process in order to understand what art and the location here in public places is in Nuremberg. And the main goal of the Symposium Urbanum is to see public spaces as a place of interaction in the city, in contrast to in rural areas, and to redefine it. What's the difference between a city and a village and a rural area? In the city, in the societies of the city, it is very important that everyone can express and promote and represent their own opinion, but still work together. In the rural villages, very often people are excluded. You cannot do that in the cities. You have lots of people coming together with many different opinions. And one tool for this, one instrument for this is art, because art can always explore new spaces. Art can have a look and explore different corners and nooks and crannies of our society that we would not otherwise be able to. So we have had many findings, many results on how the city works, how you can manifest the different expressions of Nuremberg, and maybe we can find solutions not only for Nuremberg but also for other places as well. But first, I would like to thank to the Committee for Plastic Arts and all of the city representatives that are here. We need your money. Without your money, we are not able to do anything. Thank you very much for your support. I would like to thank two foundations, the Kocher Foundation and the Rudolf Bauer Foundation. The first one was built in 2021, and its goal is to make a city a more beautiful place, and the second one is how you could promote the art in public spaces. And in 2017, you had the foundation of the Robert Bauer, which is in charge of art specifically. But we do not only have people who contributed with their money, but they also contributed with their time and their work. You are the ones who made it possible that we have this Congress today. And with Cypher, you and your team, you promoted this project, you wrote the programs, you organized exhibitions, and you also came up with a concept that is sustainable across the years in order to position Nuremberg in a new place within the art world. So, Ms. Kraus, you were one of the driving forces in the committee for plastic arts, for visual arts, and now you are working somewhere else, but you still have taken your time to come here. I would also like to thank the new museum, Ms. Schimpf, and Mr. Kaiser, who is going to be our moderator, the curator of this event, which is the one we have to thank for this program, and also the culture administration of the city council. For some time, Nuremberg was a candidate for the cultural city of 2025, and we see that we need to change a couple of things up. And at the end, I would also like to thank all of you who are here, who have shown your interest of being here in this public art, and who will participate in all of these conferences and all of these presentations and speeches of all of the artists that we will be welcoming in these days. And I would like to thank Ms. Kaiser for organizing this program, that you're not only, Mr. Heiser, that you're not only going to be our moderator, but you'll also be inviting us to debates and to conversations so we can have a look at all perspectives and all aspects of the culture of commemoration. I would like to pass the floor to you, Mr. Heiser.
Thank you very much. Dear audience, dear participants, speakers, YouTube channel watchers, Dr. Schimpf, Mr. Ulrich. I would like to welcome Maria Ines Plaza-Lazo and Vijay Doktas, who really made a large contribution to the program. I would like to thank Andreas Wissen and Ellen Seifermann, who trusted me to design this. Hello to everybody. My task in this introductory talk is to get some structural clarity for myself, but also for you. What motivated this conference and what are its goals? What actual current debates are their horizon, and what concrete form it could make possible in front of this horizon? This starts, of course, with historical current reason, with the Symposium Urbanum, which on the 500th anniversary of Albrecht Dürer happened 50 years ago. If you had a look at the exhibition, or if you live in Nürnberg, this is not news to you. All those who look from the outside, this was... So if you look at the documentary exhibition in the new museum showing about the implementation of 29 artist contribution in Nuremberg urban space, one thing becomes clear. The conflicts that came about in Nuremberg after this were really quite strong. Vandalism was part of them, as well as a largely monopolized local press, which found contemporary art and its aesthetics, particularly abstract aesthetics, found this to be an imposition or a threat even. You shouldn't really take this very loudly and aggressively expressed opinion as decisive and representative. Nevertheless, a significant part of urban society obviously felt inspired to a violent reaction. In the 70s, there were similar reactions to similar activities. 1997, the first sculpture projects in Münster, there was police presence necessary. There was still vandalism, even in the second edition of this sculpture project in 1987. And it was only in 1997, at the third edition of this sculpture project, Münster Urban Society came to peace with their sculpture project, not least because the press attributed an increasing importance to this event and even compared it to Kassel Documenta. Now, you might see this as a calculation of city marketing, but it's also an appropriation by the urban society, which accepts art in the public space and as creating community, including all the points of friction, and sees it as their art. You see, so work by Nicole Eisenbaum, which was installed in 2017. Generally, the Münster society was accepting this, but at this time, this fountain had to cope with some vandalism. These were larger-than-life, non-binary figures lounging around a water basin. Turned out to be a public favorite, maybe particularly because of that, it was vandalized several times. The background is that Eisenman, as she said it herself, wanted to topicalize the fate of her Jewish family who had to flee the Nazis, but also took the topic of this location, which is supposed to be a meeting point of gay men, and where there's also a monument to the lesbian poet Annette von Droste-Hülshoff. The work was damaged, a head was sawn off, and another one was trodden underfoot. There were swastikas and homophobic symbols sprayed onto the work. So, fascist reaction to form, location, and content. On the 2nd of October, this group of figures was reinstituted thanks of an initiative of citizens and was again inaugurated. If you look at this as a kind of learning process, a tough fight, not only against vandalism, but against the forces, destructive forces, which only administer and exclude. It took one generation for acceptance to arise without art being completely immune to violence, hostile to art and often people. But the progression is a combination of a 10-year interval and the permanence of the works in the urban space. This made it possible, and that's also characteristic for the Documenta exhibition. But this learning process doesn't never seem to be finished, but there's always drawbacks. New demands arise to permit an artistic and civil society free interaction between works and audiences, and also to protect them against attacks, and particularly aggressive attacks from the extreme right. This mixture of permanence and interval, it seems to me, for various reasons, has not developed in Nuremberg. The exhibition on 50 years of art in the public space in the Kunsthalle gives a lot of material to prove this. Reasons why such a process of stabilization and improvement in the public art in this public sphere hasn't really developed in Nuremberg. Looking at it from the outside, of course, have some very obvious aspects of the specific town city history, a double aspect. The city of Dürer, an important center of Renaissance north of the Alps, a location of humanism and Reformation in the 19th century, was called the Empire's treasure chest from a romantic perspective. And in the 20th century, it, of course, got the particular attention of National Socialists. Whoever is living in Nuremberg has heard and seen this before. The concept of the Empire's treasure chest, on the one hand, went back to the fact that from 1423 onward, Nuremberg was the location for the medieval crown jewels, of the emperors, until they were saved in 1796 because French troops were approaching the city and were taken to Vienna, where they still remain in the Hofburg. On the other hand, this recurrent concept, romantic idealization of a medieval the cityscape in Nuremberg was very prominent, so that the tourism office took this title and repeated it again and again in its travel guides. For National Socialists, this was easy to take over in the mythological kitsch of root Germanism. After the Anschluss of Austria, they were these insignia of the empire were taken to Nuremberg from on command, Hitler's command, and in 1946 taken back to Vienna on U.S. initiatives. So they were connected with In 1927, it was a part of the party rallies of the National Socialist Party, and the racial laws were passed in 1937, which gave a pseudo-legal basis for the persecution of the Jews and even made it a state law. These laws were supported to a great measure by Julius Streicher, who in 1923 had started the weekly magazine Der Stürmer, the Stormtrooper in Nuremberg, and who had sort of coined the enemy image of a Jewish racial ignominy, and played a great role with its propaganda rag in preparing the propagandist climate. And he was the National Socialist par excellence. And of course, there were the spectacles of the party rally parades. But this image of Nuremberg is only completed by the trials which happened after the Allied victory. Without the precedents of the Nuremberg processes, for example, the International Criminal Court in Den Haag, it would be unthinkable. For the first time, these trials established principles that representatives of a sovereign state at the time were not going to get impunity for grave crimes, particularly crimes against humanity. Why am I reminding you of these facts, which are of course well known, because all these factors of the Nuremberg image, the treasure chest, the racial laws, the party rallies, including the grounds and the Nuremberg trials, almost echo by definition when you just start thinking about the urban space in general and artistic intervention in this urban space. Also in the case of Nuremberg, other parts of history are covered over. For example, the rise of the city for industrial city in the 19th century, in the time of the Red Nuremberg, when the city in the time of the foundation of the German Empire in the late 19th century became a center of the workers' movement. We have to add something else. The NSU murders in Nuremberg gave a further deeply disturbing level to the Nazi past of the city. And even if it's only because of the not sufficient research, and Enver Simcek was murdered in 1999 as the first victim of the NSU. 2005, Ismail Yasha in Nuremberg, and 2001, Abdul Özgün. And the first crime by NSU in June 1999 was an attack with a bomb to a pub in the Scheuerstraße, where a Turkish worker was injured. So it's a city where NSU and the network supported it raged first and most. Tomorrow we will be looking at the NSU complex and aspects which touch upon these artistic and social society dealing with these murders. And Birgit Meyer, an expert on the NSU complex, will guide you on a commented walk to the sites of these murders. A city society always have to face up to these abysses, not only so it doesn't forget and doesn't see the signs that lead to new terror and crimes against humanity, but also because with each new dealing something can be taken away from forgetting, can be unforgotten. One way of creating this anew goes beyond the classical means of journalist or historiographic research, whether in institutional framework or as a civil society initiative. But we also have to ask what place is given to commemoration, and the commemoration by those involved, by those most concerned, family members, friends of the victims, the right to commemoration, a formulation which I found first with the artist Ulf Amende, means that commemoration can only happen then. So the kind of the kind of remembrance that was just been ordered from above, or is just a symbol for remembrance, is really worthless, because but it gives the reason for asking and demanding a right for true commemoration. And even worse, if commemoration is actively prevented, so it's only consequential that a Nuremberg initiative calls itself breaking the silence. So it's owed to them that at the site where Abraham Ojuguru was murdered in 2001, there is a plaque which has been vandalized again and again, and a representative of this initiative will be part of the forum. This plaque already points to the role that text, signs and symbols play. And so in this context, and this is a second parallel way to research and civil society, this second is an artistic intervention, documentary work or memorials. Often the documentary work itself is a memoriam, as Michaela Mellin's Memory Leaves from Munich, or the project initiated by Talia Feldman and other artists and activists, We Are Here, which in its shape and form shows collective responsibility and initiative, and it's owed to a network of survivors who showed solidarity and at the same time commemorate the numerous victims in the shape of a digital net-based platform. And Talia started this together with Ibrahim Aslan, a survivor of the arson attack of Mölln. Apart from the just completely staggering number, and apart from the possibility of looking at individual crimes and commemorating the victims, there's one thing which is clear. There is a continuity of these racist, anti-Semitic, misogynist and homophobic crimes. And there's also the dimension of at least structural organization, at least in parts, behind these deeds, be it extreme right-wing networks, but be it media-based right-wing populist and right-wing extreme populist propaganda, and lots of things have not been solved. There are things we didn't know about, and we didn't know that we didn't know them until we confronted them. New knowledge and new valuations, new assessments keep this dealing with commemoration alive. The current exhibition, this is the inauguration of the Enver Şimşek Square, early October this year. I wanted to show this earlier on for the next picture now. Now we come to the exhibition that's currently being shown in Berlin, which was researched and curated by art historian Wolfgang Braun. Is the list of those gifted by God in the German Historical Museum. They certainly radically increased my knowledge about the continuity of Nazis in German art and culture. It's about the time that also the Symposium Urbanum happened. It's about the scope of it. We knew about Breker and Riefenstahl, but it wasn't only them who had a career after the war, but there was a certain Hermann Kasper. Kasper, who did the wood inlay in Hitler's desk in the Reichskanzlei, and who designed the parades for the opening of the House of German Art in Munich 1937. Their title, The 2000 Years of German Art. It could be by Mel Brooks, but it was by Adolf Hitler. Anyway, he was an artist who who created the most awful propaganda art commissioned by the Nazis, and he had been a professor since 1938 and at some time vice president of the academy. And there was only a short interruption in 1946, and he remained this. In 1968 there were student protests and there was a critical exhibition. Nevertheless, Caspar remained in his post as professor until he retired in 1937. Even more, the vice Bavarian president Alois Hundhammer commissioned Caspar in 1966 to create a tapestry for the Meistersingerhalle in Nuremberg. This is a really Danai present. There was a protest letter to Nuremberg Lord Mayor Urschlichter, which was published in January 1966 in the 8 Uhr Blatt, which was a sort of subsidiary of the Munich Evening Times. The headline is, "Don't accept this present." The people signing this was the writer Hermann Kesen and the painter Birgitta Hajduk, who quite rightly called Caspar the chief designer of the Nazi regime. But nevertheless, the Gobelin was solemnly, the tapestry was solemnly unveiled in 1937 in Meistersingerhalle, and it's a really disgusting work of pastiche, a crude mixture of Botticelli and Gustav Klimt, quotations in the medium of tapestry, a musica presented surrounded by string instruments and, strangely enough, monstera leaves. In the Senate Hall of the Munich Maximilianeum, which is the seat of the Bavarian Parliament, until today, obviously, apparently there is a further Caspar tapestry. If it's not completely wrong, this is the original that's in the German Historic Museum. The Nuremberg Gobelin Hall was kind of talked down and camouflaged in rhetoric. On the website in 2013, on the 50th anniversary of the concert hall, they said they talked about other works of art in the entrance hall. Quote, "The tapestry in the major foyer," this is the image I'm showing right now, is by Hermann Caspar, and it's called Frau Musica. It's a present by the Bavarian state government for opening of the Meistersingerhalle. It stands for the typical artistic forms of the 1960s, together with the precious floor materials, walls, and lighting. Now you think Herr Heiser, of course, wants that all these things are removed immediately and putting in mothballs. No, not at all. I think it would be completely wrong to just do away with the traces of the continuity of the war. No, we must not be silent about this continuity. Whereas the product of this shameful thing is still under the radar, or if somebody notices it is immediately removed and put in the depot. But you have to topicalize this, and we have to work on this, both in historiography and in artistic intervention, inclusively of the readiness to be, loudly silent about the provenience of art, objects of art. And I think of the Humboldt Forum here, to do exactly the opposite of that, what the Berlin exhibition does that time. The complementary reaction is a critical appraisal of artistic activities in public space, which says they are positive about it, but at the same time, when there's a little headwind, they immediately give up. Only one example that we talk about more on Sunday. Ole Ogubis work, Monument for Strangers and Refugees, was erected for the Documenta 2017 in a central location on Königsplatz in Kassel. It's an obelisk, so it should be a very familiar object in public space. can't really be too abstract or anything. Even the inscription can't really be called controversial. It's a quotation from the Gospel of St. Matthew. I was a stranger and you gave me shelter. Unquote. But obviously, even the fact that the inscription was not only in German and English, but also in Turkish and Arabic, was reason enough for the AfD to talk about distorting art and presented and created enough pressure that a year later, with an SPD Lord Mayor in the early hours of the Day of German Unity, this obelisk, which was supposed to have been permanent, was taken down. What were the circumstances that made it possible that in 2019 the obelisk was erected again, not in the central location, but in a similar, but in a street nearby? We'll be talking about this on Sunday, but this is also a learning experience for this. Nuremberg has that kind of learning experience as well. You will surely know what I'm talking about, the events surrounding Olaf Metzel's veiling of the Schöne Brunnen in 2006 for the Football World Cup. I can't spare the Nuremberg people. From today, it's really quite stunning that the uproar that a small but very loud and aggressive part of the population voiced against a work of art which was quite clear from the beginning that it was also clearly communicated that it was only going to be temporary for some months. Why? Since then, at the same place and close by, again for restoration work or similar works, there were printed sheets veiling this, and nobody complained about this. You know, and I remember when the last time I was in Munich, there was an ugly sheet veiling. It's okay if it's renovated. But part of this uproar must have been that Metzel used old seats from the Berlin Olympic Stadium, so new refuse from a Nazi building. But mainly that part of the population felt provoked, which basically wanted the demonstrative traditional in a cityscape, if not even a restorative element, that just the idea of a modernistic form, in this case a big torsion, What's remarkable seen from today that all this was before the rise of social media, before Facebook and Telegram and so on. So obviously it was enough to have a local press that took this development with great glee, with the 8 Uhr Blatt then still present, which was stopped in 2012. So there's only one local newspaper monopoly. The Berlin Taz in 2004 said we are a one newspaper region, and introduced the problematics not only for Nuremberg but specific for a major town with 2 subscription newspapers. Like Cologne or Hanover. We have to think of this when we talk about public space where art appears. That means the media of the public is also changing. Monopolies on the one side, on the other hand, shrinking and fragmentation in social media. But you think that you need social media to formulate conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic or racist murder fantasy. You can talk about Streicher in 1923 when the Stürmer was founded. Frankonian Medienwerkstatt documenting the events around 2006. You see a murder threat with a gallows against the former and today culture officer Julia Lehner, and there's somebody from the security offices. I was really shocked about the reaction. The most horrible was even that the workers were shouted at when they said, so the company Christbau, he only employs Jews. So there were Nazis rampant there, whether they were confessing or undercover. And that's even the more why? If you think that it took until 2011 and later until the public found out that Ismail Yasha, a year before 2005, had been murdered by 5 shots in Scharerstraße by the NSU. And this was already the 3rd murder in Nuremberg and the 6th altogether. The violent reactions about almost harmless and art production must have had its deep repercussions in various directions. So far, as far as I know, there were not a similar controversial situation, maybe because some of the officers, maybe for understandable reasons, were a bit scared to repeat such a scenario. Because the violent reaction to even temporary interventions could not be foreseen, not even in a historical point of view, from the fighting about the Symposium Urbanum. Then people were only irate because of contemporary abstract tendencies in art.
Dass Nürnberg trotz einer nicht erfolgreichen Bewerbung Kulturhauptstadt
the fact that Nuremberg, in spite of not being successful and becoming a European capital of culture, has continued to work on to give support to new artistic interventions in public space, and also looking at the factor of the culture of commemoration, not as an add-on or a side event, but an essential position. That doesn't mean that any work of art everywhere and whenever has to be modeled on this. But when I think of how various initiatives, at least at the latest since the 2008 exhibition Das Gelände, the party rally grounds in the Artau, have been put off and with their initiatives and told they could start whenever. So I have a sneaking suspicion that they do talk about this in a symbolic matter, but they don't really want it to happen because it could create right-wing headwind. So the beautiful action, the Rainbow Prelude at the Zeppelin Tribune, has really underlined this busy stasis, the fact that these interventions don't happen. It's only possible if you do it without a permission, and if you want to run the danger that you become criminalized, even if you use paint that can be removed without traces. Of course, you have to say that Nuremberg is not alone in this problematics. Berlin, for example, is just restoring the Maifeld stands at the Olympic Stadium, which was erected for quite similar reasons as the Zeppelin grandstand, as a completely over-the-top where Hitler and the Nazi elite were adored. And they're using a lot of money for this. There's no mention of any critical or artistic intervention in this context. Nuremberg is particularly obvious, but not alone in this task. The Berlin exhibition showed that around 300 works of Nazi artists are still adorning and furnishing German cities, often uncommented. There are artistic approaches to look how to deal with this without making the violence that are manifested in these objects or symbolized by these objects becoming simply invisible. This also implies that classical artistic intervention with an expert jury and a curator's team is not the only model of doing things. For example, the example of Talia Feldman in the initiative We Are Here shows how networks of people can initiate such projects. And a further model is that of the new commissioners, the Nouveau Commandateur. It's a principle started in 1992, which kind of links the jury-based commission to a grassroots and community-based implementation. And then there's the model of the commons, a principle of cooperative commons, which also talks about ownership relationships and about property. And affects the concept of public and urban space. We will be talking about this in the afternoon. But in this context, we are talking about basic questions of socialization, of structural principles of where art and public happens. And it becomes clear that these debates have to happen in the context of questions of the culture of commemoration. A culture of commemoration, per definition, is as the US artist Pope L says, memory belongs to no one. That's why we are so fraught together in the name of it.
Die Erinnerung gehört niemandem. Deshalb sind wir im Namen der Erinnerung so eng miteinander verbunden.
This, of course, doesn't make the question easier. What is a suitable culture of commemoration, suitable for historical events, but also about contemporary feelings, and which has become much stronger in last keywords: Holocaust, colonial crimes, competing or co-commemoration. First of all, this debate has been held in a way as if it could be seen isolated of the events of the youngest past in a separate historical loop, as if the murders of Hanau, Halle and those of the NSU never happened. Halle, however, shows how correct the publicist Caroline Imke said, and she was by the right-wing press told she was accused of anti-Semitism, that the neo-fascist worldview can always organize its murder code as a kind of follow-up. So if it's not the Jews, then it's the immigrants, then the women, then climate activists. So that's exactly how the Halle perpetrator acted. When he didn't manage to kill Jews, he killed two passers-by, Jana Lange and Kevin Schatzer, and tried it with further, for example, the Somali Abdraxman Aftax Abraham. Events in connection with the NSU and the attacks on Halle and Hanau, they make us ask, how could it happen that they happened, that they could be denied so long, that the accomplices are still walking free, and that until today the commemoration of the victims has anything but a suitable place, even if there is improvements. But year after year and decades after what happened, there's also the question what consequences they have for the current dealing with commemoration and its presence or non-presence in the urban space. In Germany, Germany was often seen as a model for looking at and dealing with your past and the crimes of the past. Björn Höcke, the fascist, said, without reason, we Germans are the only people that planted a memorial of shame into its heart. So the shame is not the crime, but that it's made centrally visible. That's exactly the task we should fulfill: central visibility for the victims of NSU in all cities, for those of Halle and Hanau. And so the supposed ideal role of Germany has not just splintered, it's really completely undermined. Why? Jürgen Habermas said the remaining saying that the Holocaust was singular doesn't mean that the political understanding of citizens of a nation is kind of frozen. Remembering our colonial history is an important expansion of this concept. But just this particular expansion has triggered an entire series of rhetoric and practical defense mechanisms. So this expansion contains exactly the necessity that, for example, had to be had to be seen in reference to the genocide of the Sinti and Roma by the National Socialists. So, and I think this is a main thought for this conference. We have to make sure that we look at the concrete events and the consequences of these events, Nuremberg, Halle, but also historical precursors, which can give us some important information for this situation, because otherwise, if we uncouple these events from our deliberations, we are narrowing our view. We have to think everything together. So it's important to look at the immediate post-war years, the mechanisms of justification, of denial, of painting over, not least because of current research, have become all too obvious. Violence after the violence, of which Aisha Gülen talked about, has come already, has been visible already. The current dealing or non-dealing with the colonial time again repeats in an eerie way how these mechanisms of discourse psychology work. Just very quickly, 4 points. First of all, don't freeze things, as Habermas put it, but it's a Sisyphus work. We have to start again and again. Second point, Habermas also talks about this in the discussion about Holocaust or colonial crime. Is there continuity or is there a break? And you have to talk about an inversion. Habermas talks about it. He says that the National Socialists fought against an inner enemy, and that the colonialists talked about an othering of people. So this is this point where these two things come together. When we talk about neo-fascist, they look at an outer enemy who comes into the country and becomes an inner enemy, linking this. Art can only react to this in the measure that civil society is prepared to face up to this disturbing knowledge. Dividing it up and hierarchizing historical and current injustice will not be successful, but it will only cover up the problems. We need what I would call a defragmentation of the public. But I don't really quite know what this could mean, and I hope that the debates of these 3 days will be able to contribute it. How can we fight against this dividing, against this fragmentation? Not by kitschy encounters, but by working on our differences, by general links of multi-perspectives, and by denying art can only contribute to favoring the own structures that enable its generation, and so it can make the Sisyphus work possible, and at the same time it can make it a bit more lasting. It's not only a task for communities and initiatives, but also for cities in the sense of administrative and governing instances. It's a complex task that it will be difficult to even do justice to this, but doing nothing or hyperactive paralysis, but rather not, can't be the way out.
Well, then, I think I am going to give the floor to Maria. Am I correct? I am looking forward to your presentation. Oh, we're going to have a short break first. That's awesome, too. So we're going to have... I think this is loud enough. Is it? Is it loud enough?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to start my presentation with a question. And of course, I would like to thank Mr. Heiser for your trust and for inviting me here and having this opportunity to present this keynote speech right at the beginning of the symposium and be able to present my 50 cents, my thesis. And I'm going to start with a question.
Politischen Aktivismus und die Krise der Repräsentation im öffentlichen Raum.
What unites, what is the relationship between art practices, political activism, and the crisis of representation in public spaces today? And my answer to this question is pluriversity.
The pluriverse?
Or the pluriverse. Not as an increment of diversity, but as a form of collectivity for beyond binary logic and periphery and centralism. The anthropologist Arturo Escobar, in his books Polyversal Politics, introduces the politics of feasibility, a lens that deconstructs established notions of what is real and achievable to allow the emergence of the radically alternative visions of the future. This type of politics responds to a viral need to return beyond the myths of modernization, industry, and progress to narratives where people seek to realize the great desire for new forms and governance. The concept of the pluriverse is used to show how, from different ontological perspectives, especially relational cosmovisions like the Los Andes, the Colombian worldview of the Andes, alternatives to capitalism actually become visible. The artist Oscar Santillan currently associates this term. It's too light. I hope you can see the details of this picture. But he associates this term with the idea of an indigenous futurism, starting from the premise that he calls the antimundo, or the anti-world, is there as a way of identifying and generating realities that don't fit in the world. End of quote. The piece Anti-Being, as you can see it here, 0A, is something that Santillan was able to draw inspiration from colonial chronicles and 3D modeled entities, combining elements of these colonial lists to create an entity that defies further categorization. The result is a spectrum of realities liberated from normative Western reality. It is free from this normative Western reality. The images in Santillan's series start from the indigenous term waka, or creature. A waka can manifest itself in infinite ways. It can be a mountain, it can be a rock, it can be an object. The term shows that matter is that the matter that it forms is an entity, or an identity that is sacred and has a certain cognitive ability. The waka manifests itself in many different ways, and the colonizers who wanted to identify it in order to destroy it tried to make lists of the elements that it could it be? I just got confused. So we have different lists of the chronicles from the colonial times that are very expansive. At the end, they said it was useless to destroy it. So it's a huge thesis here. Take a deep breath. So following the proposal for planetary justice and sustainable post-capitalist social formations of the pluriverse, the idea of the public sphere would be determined to be the fluidity between virtual and physical spaces. This inseparability between social channels and the streets of the world would be extrapolated to the inseparability between the exhibition space, where it is important to replace representation with intersectional dialogue, and the private space where communities can emerge. Based on this, we have commons and undercommons that are in the focus of my arguments today, of my argumentation. Commons are to be understood as what they always were. And I quote from Wikipedia, I quote that it comes from the Latin communis, from English obviously common, in German gemeinsam, or common resources, that emerge from self-organized processes of common need-oriented production, management, maintenance, and or the use of commoning. Commons are often located beyond the market and the state, by which it meant, above all, that we have common context with different logics that dominate there. And undercommons, on the other hand, is defined as a pluriversal practice from the Black radical tradition that draws on, inspires, and extends contemporary social and political thought and aesthetic critique. Today, the general prosperity of social life faces mutations in mechanisms of control, from the proliferation of capitalist logistics to the vicious cycle of debt. Cassie Thornton wrote about this in her current issue of the Artist of the Working Class, which is a street paper that I'm going to tell you about later on. And it goes on to the pedagogical management, the achievement, well-being, self-care, and all possible forms of exclusivity irritating individualisms. From and within the social poetry of life and the undercommons, the cultural theorists Stefan Harney and Fred Morton deconstruct a series of concepts: study, depth, environment, planning, and publishing on the ephemeral path to a historical and global form of self-organized assembles of social life. In this context, culture and art as commons and undercommons would be a way to improve the working and living conditions of those who create and maintain them, who have been exploited for decades as unpaid volunteers in museums. Yes, as unpaid volunteers in museums, or overworked curators and artists without a fixed income. Inclusive spaces and available time as commons and art commons allow that the us or the we, that we can make a kind of break with cultural hierarchies that allow people to exploit themselves to achieve art. Then we have the topic of urgency. The urgency behind making collective ownership in communities in solidarity for a world that was made of many worlds as the ontological and epistemic basis of art practice, activism, and social communality is great. Its immeasurable dimension shows the struggles for commons and undercommons of workers of art. And from here on, I mean with this formulation not only those who are imposed representative roles of a well-functioning apparatus, speaking artists, curators, and intellectual scientists, but I'm also talking about those who want to put on this hat, meaning people who do not have support from the state, who are recipients of unemployment benefits, are homeless, refugees, students, freelancers, farmers, cleaning persons, state care workers. Seeing these bitter situations, the definition of public art, the art in public spaces or in buildings, as a discipline has become obsolete. Public art is currently stagnating in a working model that only follows state budgets and functions. And of course, of the, in principle, great legal requirement to invest 2% of these costs in the public buildings in art. This model has raised the claim of permanently influencing cities, but the adaptation at the institutional level of these transformations and what determines the urban cityscapes today is still pending. So what I argue here is for public art as an ephemeral planning process to favor relationships over places and to achieve a lasting impact from the common. The practices that I associate with this are intrinsically related to the topic. The following works that I'm going to present here, they will show what being public can mean for a global society. And I would like to invite you as individuals, as the collective, and also as representative of the state to deal with these issues in a different way, from a different perspective.
Als Beispiel der Veralterung von Public Art, nämlich
As an example of the obsolescence of public art, I would like to show Christo and Jean-Claude's spectacular work, the wrapping of the Arc de Triomphe, in the middle of the Champs-Élysées in Paris.
Die letzten 3 Wochen zirkulierten auf meinem
In the last 3 weeks, I've been seeing the selfie shots from Paris on my newsfeed and social media, the imposing gesture. Especially people in Germany, they made a pilgrimage to this installation, and there were hardly any critical comments on the work. It shows the French monument as a gigantic, charming, imperfect package, a monstrosity depoliticized into the image of the romantic notion of the artistic work that worked as a but functioned only as a business, supported by free PR machinery of the social media users' data.
Denkmäler, Gedenkstätten, Statuen.
Monuments, memorials, statues, and sculptures are not the only established forms of art in public space. They are ephemeral. We also have performances, dancing, theater, poetry, graffiti, posters, installations, you can name it. But what allows us to look outside of a system and outside when art is formulated by the center of power, the ruling class, tax dodgers, politicians, boards of directors formed by rich egoist people in museums and art associations. Of course, I do not mean all museums, but it's more often the case. So if we formulate it from this perspective, how can we absorb the periphery and imagine another form of collaboration? This triumphant monument whose power on the French state history or on the history of postmodernism gained through Christo could be replaced as a formal property of an art in public space with an applied form of care and mutual aid at the state level. To see caring as an imperative, as a substitute for monuments, and to encourage the form of civic protest not only through the ideological but also aesthetic sublimation. Otherwise, we have a perpetuation of the obsolete with each new commission, and these forms of public art remain an isolated mediatic or institutional event.
Die Entstehung von Public Art, das ist meine Erfahrung nach einigen Sitzungen dieses Jahr.
And the emergence of public art, and that I can say after several meetings on the subject in this year alone, including as an advisor of the Commission for Art in the Public Space in Munich, primarily follows a working model that maintains a Eurocentric view of the public sphere. But how can public art be composed today? How could it actively contribute to the struggles of a society in which people themselves define what they need, especially beyond the legitimatizing mechanisms of the international art establishment? I deliberately do not want to discuss any additional examples of art that is permanently exhibited in public spaces, but I want to talk about ephemeral manifestations in which the ontological power of experiencing art as acting in public as what cities should invest in over the next couple of years. In the end, however, it is not a question about how you can differentiate between permanent and ephemeral works of art. But let's stay in Paris for now. Nature, Mort. This, what we can see here, is from the artist Anne Imhof. She has time until Sunday to transform the Palais de Tokyo in Paris into an allegorical simulacra of forms of violence through exclusivity, ice-cold taxidermic representations of self-reflection, anxiety and ecstasy, boxing matches and embraces. I'm very thirsty today. All right. So, as the Pied Piper of Hamelin, the performers have lured the crowds deeper into the bowels of a broken society. They seemed to preach revolt and rebellion. There was a sequence of visually powerful tableaux vivants that conjured the performers as dark messiah figures with imaginary stigmata, and they kept coming. They kept appearing on my screen on my social media feed. They were non-committal, arbitrary, among other totems of modernism, Duchamp, Picabia, Paris. What is represented as a collectivity in Natural Mort is a hierarchy after romantic imagination of the artist without a job. This is an unfortunate truth here. Eliza Douglas, who we can see here in this picture, she is the protagonists of the performance, and all other beautiful selected people that were included as curated pops. There are curated props in the Imholz-Mikrokosmos who wanted exactly the contrary. They would try to get closer to the audience. The audience is left to their own devices, in their own awe. The performance embodies the institution itself. The borders become fuzzy to where the establishment starts. Nothing opens to the outside. Why do we do that? Why don't we go out? Why am I looking at these pictures on Instagram? Why am I confirming this form of public circulation of art? Why am I promoting it? Can we break out of this? Can we break this art free? Now let's go back to Berlin. The activist, artist, and spokesperson of the BBK, Zoe Claire Miller, is currently producing very delicate porcelain sculptures that are following the strategies of collective resistance. Here you can see it in the Humboldt Forum. It's burning. And the Humboldt Forum is a poster child example of wrong decisions made for public space, an additional symbol of undemocratic neoliberal developments in cities as Berlin. Miller's sculpture is not only criticism, which is quite sensible and understandable, but it's more than that. It is part of the creation of movements. The strategies of the collective resistance, and they happen with the participation of different self-organized initiatives and activist groups against the evil neoliberal capitalistic developments of the Berlin municipal landscapes, and has polymorph forms of expression. And how you can associate with what images that you are seeing here is that we have this different project from Miller in cooperation with Marco Schmidt. And it's this project called the Exorcia Raku. I hope that Zoe Claire Miller will talk about this later on during our discussion panel and tell us about her experiences here. What is Exorcia Raku? As you can see, it is a very rough form of porcelain burning. And you can see this project in the floating university. And it has a bottom of soft power programs that makes it possible that when you produce porcelain, you can exercise capitalism. That's the concept. And the Raku oven is a kybernetic mechanism, you could say. And it has a self-regulating metabolism. And you can see it as a collective practice that not only invite artists but also activists, but anyone who wants to can participate. And since we're a bit short on time, I'm just going to skim over these other examples here. Here we can see Sun and Sea, a work from Lina Lapelite. Unpronounceable name, I'm sorry, where she represents a disappearing border between the public space and the museum space. The exciting thing about this here is that if you have a look at the apocalyptic songs performed by dilettante and professional singers, by amateur and professional singers, the public space was suddenly flooded by the exhibition space, and therefore became the most successful exhibition in the Venice Biennale of 2019. And the shift in paradigms that we can see here today is very significant. It is the public that is projected within the institutional space and not the other way around. Until recently, before this phenomenon, of being presented in the public space. The institutions were situated within the public sphere. For example, the Gemeindegalerie of the Potsdamer Platz, the Pinakothek in Munich, the Guggenheim in Venice. That means the places where they legitimize what art is. But what this project was able to achieve is a form of deinstitutionalization of art by a form of negotiation, of action, of taking action that can only happen outside on public space. The definition of art in the old paradigm can only be thought of as from the center of, as coming from the institutions. It is a process that is not peripheral, but it's something that happens within the institutions. So the question to ask would be, and I'm kind of lost here, you can see. What are the lessons learned that are the most important? What are the moments that can be seen as objectifying, and when are you objectifying a person as a part of the legitimization of what art is? And further example is Joanne, work from Samuel Fedora, who is also going to be part of the discussion panel later on. And here we see a balancing act between performing and virtual space and what is could consider the free space. From both spaces, we have different ways of interacting. We have different aspects and mechanisms. We have the cancel culture club, for example, and the public opinion is not seen as an individual own statement, but it's an act that will have an influence on other spheres. Joanne is a person who, or the work Joanne is a person who was a victim of mobbing, and the core message of this work is how can the legitimization of art or the objectivized, how can the legitimization of art save the objectivized life of Joanne? So that's how Simon Fujiwara tried to see how we can interact with these images, and he's going to talk about that later on as well. Unfortunately, I need to finish up and wrap this up. So I'm just going to go to the next work, which would be Arts of the Working Class. I am the editor, the founder and editor of this street newspaper, an independent street newspaper, so to say. It's called Arts of the Working Class. And you may be asking yourselves what this name has to do with the working class at all, with the historic working class. And I could introduce it as follows. All over the world, the precarization of life is becoming more and more visible, as well as the economic and social devastation. Every day, we see more and more people sleeping on the streets. The deregulation of the financial markets and the public financing of their speculative operations through cheap money, it has led to such a global increase in rents that today, not only those who work with art, but also galleries can no longer afford to live in the inner cities. The ecosystem of the arts has lost its source of innovation. It had always been based on a constructive confrontation between what is possible in economic wealth and the richness of the imagination. For instance, 3 years ago, Alina Kolar, Paul Solansky, and we created a tool for productive conversations between art and politics, between the rich and the poor, between fiction and reality. It does not have any superficial illustrations, no bullshit.
wird jedem, der sie
And
verkaufen möchte, kostenlos
everyone
zur
who wants to
Verfügung
have it, he can have it for free.
Die meisten Verkäufer
to
behalten
sell.
100% der
So
Einnahmen.
anyone who wants to sell it can have it for free, so they can
Keine
sell it.
Registrierung erforderlich.
You do
Man
not
kommt
have to
einfach
register. It is very easy. You can just approach one of our points of collection in Berlin or in LA, take as many as you want, and then you can sell it and earn some money.
Die Verkäufer bekommen ein Produkt,
The
das die
sellers
Leute
are
gerne
getting a
kaufen,
product
nicht aus Wohlwollen, sondern
that
weil
they
es
are
lässig
selling not because they just
Auch
want
weil
to, but
es
because
extrem
they,
gut aussieht.
you know, it's prestige. It looks pretty good.
Partner bekommen, ist
And
ein
what the
Platz
customers
in einer Versammlung
get is they
interessanter
get a
und
spot
herausfordernder
on the
Perspektiven
assembly
und die einen
of
Bewusstsein für die Rolle und Relevanz ihrer Arbeit nicht nur
they get a platform where they can present their work and also present their work and the relevance of their work to the broad society. Arts of the Working Class gives the joy of collaboratively navigating the real contradictions of the economies in which we work. Our proposition is to consider the aesthetic and intellectual refinement not as something to be fought against, but as something to be disseminated and shared with everyone. We want to redistribute dignity and wealth on a peer-to-peer level. So what we try to do and what we try to stand for is for mutual respect. We want to give it a vessel where perhaps you don't have to explain a lot about it, but people just understand that it's about mutual respect. And something that is even more utopian than Arts of the Working Class is Cassie Thornton's hologram. This is a peer-to-peer, post-capitalist, feminist healthcare system. And that's Cassie in the middle there. And it is composed, it's about 4 people who get together, and 3 of them take care of the physical and mental and social health of the 4th person that has some physical, mental, and social troubles. So it's basically like a form of therapy, or beyond therapy, it's a form of activist work. And you could understand that, and I hope that's what Cassie's going to explain later on. I hope she will tell us more about her work. It would be a way of thinking beyond the binary concepts of public space and non-public space, and where we could maybe think about how can we achieve better things or different things if we all work together on the things we're struggling with, or at least the most of us. So I intend to focus on today's constant negotiation and redistribution of commons and undercommons as unmapped and unmappable non-places where collective forms of knowledge production and sustainable coexistence seek to replace precarious living and working conditions both inside and outside of the art world, and to engage in conversation during the panel. If cities like Nuremberg are honestly interested in using art to contribute to democratic processes and broader education, then they must turn away from producing permanent trinkets that decreasingly captivate the interest even of the artists themselves. And they must stop this show of mutual sanctimony or feigned innocence. I'm just saying, not pointing fingers. If cities really want a sustainable aesthetic, if they really want sustainable aesthetic, intellectual and social transformations, then they need to invest in structures, in models of assembly, collaboration and governance, such as the ones that I will present later during our conversation, during the panel. So what is common in this ground? That's what we're going to talk about in a bit. Thank you very much, Oliver, from Gustav, who is going to moderate the panel,
Zoe Claire Miller
and Claire Miller, and Cassie Thornton and Zoe, who are going, and Mr. Fujiwara, who's going to join us from Berlin in this panel, where we're going to be talk about artistic agendas as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm Oliver Körner from Gustav. This is my first panel ever, I think. And I'm also a hybrid. I work for Deutsche Bank as a freelancer for the Tower of Evil. This is how I make my money, to finance appearances like today, because if I also work for Taz, for Freitag, for leftish newspapers, and for magazines like AD or 032C, for glossy magazines. So I try to make a living. And a while ago I wrote this piece about commons, and then we came into discussion, arts of the working class, and I don't really know why I'm sitting here today, but I think I get the point. Perhaps I just give 1 minute, my thoughts for 1 minute. I was listening to Jörg's lecture about the assaults of the NSU, and the first thing I thought was how far away this moment must be when people die on the streets, how this violence, how far this seems away from today, from how we sit here together, or from any monument, how this experience is really light years away from the art system. And it's really hard to share, and it's shocking. And I grew up in the art system. I didn't grow up in the art system. Basically, I'm a squatter. I'm from the 80s in Berlin. And it took me 20 years to become a writer. And in the beginning, when I experienced the art system, I also ran a gallery. I felt really safe, and I was happy to make money. And but after 10 years or so, I didn't feel so well anymore in the art system. And today, in Jörg's lecture, and also in Maria's really important lecture, we have a different feeling. We have a feeling of urgency, of a society that's splitting up, of real trouble. A lot of people who I know who didn't manage to work for Deutsche Bank or big galleries are on income support or are attacked because they're transgender or whatever. And the question today, what is common in the ground, is for me basically a question: how can art communicate with what we call reality? I think Simon will have a different view on reality. I was also thinking about this Anne Imhoff performance. You know, the point with the performance is not that it's so Teutonic and cold. For me, the interesting point is that Eliza Doolittle is like the main model for Balenciaga. It's a whole industry that uses the museum as a boutique. And the art business, I'm just free floating. Very unfortunately, the market art system has, adapts to discussions like we're having today. Also, commons is a big issue for galleries right now. Participatory models, or if you look at Olafur Eliasson, who has refugees building lamps, or if you look at the documenta, what's the upcoming documenta, who will have this idea of a common, I forgot the name of the house, the Rice House, and inviting projects is also because it's in the air. The people who invited this art collective from Indonesia are still the same people. So we're having a different show this time. And what we're talking about today is two polarities that are also represented in the art practices of the artists here today. So perhaps for me, I would say, and perhaps they're more diverse, all the art practices. But on one hand, we have this image of activism, remembering the past, fighting against Nazis, or doing magazines for homeless people, which is also the current Documenta team. They announced their participants in a magazine for homeless people. So it's like getting like a fashion already.
Well, guess where they got the newspaper idea
yes.
from?
But perhaps we don't have the time, but you could also criticize the distribution of content from the art system or PR or through homeless people, which is also a bit ambivalent. But we don't have to do this right now. So on one hand, we have this idea of activism. On the other hand, we have an idea of a glamorous art system, which also, like if we think about Julia Stoschek, doesn't really deal with the past, with the Nazi past, which a very capitalist art system. But the question today is, how do we live with these contradictions, or might they even be interesting? This was what I really took from your lecture. How can we stop to fall back into these polarities? But on the other hand, how can we not turn into some capitalist Buddhism where we say it's all the same, we have to perform stuff to find out about it? And how can we react to this urgency? Also, the next 2 days will be about a very urgent issue, like the rise of neo-Nazis in Germany. And how can the art system that really didn't change so much the last years? I mean, what I remember, what was really important for me was like some years ago when the scandals about the Whitney Biennial, when people were asking where is the money coming from, the scandals about the Serpentine Gallery, where there was this manager who was fighting for human rights, and at the same time she was financing spyware from Israel. And then we had Nan Goldin and the Sackler Foundation. And this is a major problem also for the institutions. If you look at the museums, all the museums right now are trying to decolonize their collections, or if they only have old white men, they look for queer people or forgotten white modernists. So how can we live with these contradictions, and how can we find a common ground? And I'm just finishing. How can we also prevent art from being functionalized in a simple-minded political way? Art can also art has totally the right to be exclusive. Art is also excess, if ritual, symbolic. And how can we make it more? How can we look at it differently and start to talk and in a non-bullshit way? And so perhaps I don't know if I'm supposed to introduce the artists. So we have 3 different types of artists, which might not be so different. Perhaps you want to, Zoe, perhaps you want to introduce yourself, because it's a bit obsolete if I introduce you.
Yeah, my name is Zoe Claire Miller, and I'm an artist and an activist. Within my art, I work mostly with sculpture and ceramics, and a lot with collaborative models, so working together with other people. And politically, I'm mostly engaged in basically union work. So I'm one of the spokespeople of the BBK Berlin, the Berufsverband Bildende KünstlerInnen. But I'm also engaged in lots of other political battles.
Deutsche Wohnen enteignen, right?
Yeah, Deutsche Wohnen enteignen. I'm not sure if we should step in now with kind of the 10-minute intro of recent projects of interest, or yeah?
Perhaps we do a short introduction, and then so the other 2 are just
okay. Yeah, let's do that.
Silent. I'm sorry for making such a long speech. But, I don't know, Kathy. Perhaps you want to introduce yourself. Would you just?
Sure. I'm Cassie. It's very nice to be a part of this chat. I am an artist, and I usually live in now Canada, in a little city called Thunder Bay. But right now I'm in Berlin. Yeah, I'm an artist and activist. I've been working with issues of debt and financialization, how they affect our imagination and what we sense as possible. I've been working on that for a long time. And now I work on the hologram, which is a peer-to-peer health model. And then in my activism, I've been working to support different types of sort of feminist and queer indigenous struggle in Canada, just around sort of like safety, security, and land. Yeah.
Okay, we talk about that later.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. I'm so sad that I can't be there in person, but I don't feel as bad seeing the screen situation because I think the people who are online are even bigger than the people on stage. So I feel even more present in the space. My name is Simon Fujiwara. I'm an artist. I'm based in Berlin. I am British-Japanese and have grown up between both countries. And my work, as you will see, I'm not going to be talking so much about all of my projects, but my work is a lot about image, identity, and kind of dealing a kind of personal take on navigating this image colonialism period that we live in which we're completely obliterated and bombarded with options, possibilities, and the way kind of all of culture has sort of turned into a consumable product and artifact. So my work has looked at more historical periods or figures such as Anne Frank, who I worked with a lot as a kind of examination of her as an icon, an icon who was produced, and with my former art teacher that Maria Inés spoke about briefly. And today I want to talk a little bit in my presentation about my most recent project, which is a cartoon character.
Okay, so I don't know, perhaps we just do it very briefly, like 5 to 10 minutes, the projects, and then we can start to discuss capitalism. I don't know who wants to start, perhaps you?
Okay, and we can keep up the sequence of circling through participants. Yeah, so thanks a lot for the compliments, especially after your Zerriss of Anne Imhoff and Christo. I feel very honored. Maria briefly mentioned my project Exorzierraku, which I did together with Marco Schmidt, and it was a workshop-based collaborative format where we worked with a total of around 70 people over the course of the summer and did workshops to make sculptures together. And then we fired them using this raku process, which originally was a Japanese ceramic firing technique that originated in the 16th century and then was culturally expropriated by Brits and Americans and changed quite a bit. And recently, that was in the 60s and 70s. We were invited as, actually not as artists, but as urban practitioners in residence at the Floating University. And I think that this new concept that I think was fought for quite a bit also by Raumlabor, who also started Floating University, maybe also ties into what you were mentioning as a proposal for new ideas of what should be funded in terms of public art projects. Yeah, so we wanted to bring people together in small groups that were intimate. So we had 18 workshops in total, and we invited, initially the idea was to invite specifically activists because we felt like there is so much urgency in the city happening right now, and there's all these people working with the issues of the ground, who owns the ground, who's exploiting it, who's losing their space on it. So we wanted to invite lots of people working in groups against gentrification, against displacement, groups like Berlin versus Amazon, fighting against the building of the Amazon Tower, and then also the initiatives, there are quite a few who are engaged with the deeply problematic rebuilding of the Humboldt Forum Schloss. But it turned out that almost all the activists were suffering from burnout or thought it was not such an interesting idea and didn't want to participate. So almost all the people who were politically engaged who did end up taking part were also artists or DJs or cultural practitioners in some other way, and thus were more interested in doing something with ceramics. And our perspective was basically that anyone was welcome to join who shared our belief that capitalism needs to be destroyed, and we wanted to use this, but also seeing capitalism, intersectionally, as how capitalism is intertwined with neocolonialism, with racism, with sexism, with the exploitation of earth, with ecocide, and how all of these things interlock. And yeah, so raku actually is when you take works out of the kiln when they are red hot, so they're at 1,000 degrees, and then you place them, or Western raku is then placing them in combustible organic materials such as leaves or sawdust, and then it gets very, very smoky, and this does really interesting things with the ceramic glazes. So you have a lot of very interesting visual effects, but also, of course, this very emotional and exciting and ritualistic experience with the red hot sculptures and all of the smoke. And you have to act as a group. It's something you can't do alone. You need a lot of people holding different positions. And it was really interesting to kind of the site specificity of it also, because we were working with clay that we dug out regionally. And we liked this idea of doing a group activity, that ceramics has always been a group thing, working with the clay that's here with people who are engaged with Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen, or also with Right to the City, a part of Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen that is dealing with the issue of the fact that almost a third of Berliners cannot vote because they don't have German citizenship. And yeah, the results of the workshops were very interesting. That it kind of became apparent that there were two different options: either to make a sculpture that represents what you want to exercise, or what you want something to be exercised out of. And yes, it was very individual. A lot of things were quite figurative and recognizable, and then other things were very emotional and abstract, and also it wasn't, we didn't require that people said what they were exercising, and we also have seen a couple of first positive results. So we know that it's working, because one major goal, of course, was to exercise the landlords, and we fired the sculptures representing the landlords on the night of the election for the Deutsche Wohnen und Co. Enteignen, what's it called in English again? Volksbegehren? Volksbegehren.
It's a reference. Public vote.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might have already been my 5 to 10, so I'll pass it on to Cassie.
I made a presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh. Could I have access to share my screen?
Teilnehmerin, könnt ihr den Zoom teilen? Den Zugang zum Bildschirm teilen? Kann Cassie denn
I'm guessing Simon wants to share his screen too, right? So yeah, we both need it.
Yeah.
So perhaps
I can start to just talk.
Yes, perhaps you can just start to talk. And I just wanted to mention something for the later discussion. So here, magic and alchemy are involved. And I think in your work sometimes too, right?
In mine or in
your work? Yeah, I read the hologram book a bit, and you have tarot deck cards in your book.
That's a part of the series that the Vagabond pamphlet series that published it works with an artist named Amanda Prieb from Berlin to make a tarot card that works with the concept of the book. And then we have the series also has a person in residence named Stella Lawless who writes a tarot kind of
yes, and she's a witch,
interpretation.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. Also the resident witch of the hologram.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, I still don't have access, but maybe that's also a part. That is a part of the mysticism of the moment. I made a presentation that's new today, and I think it might take like 12 minutes or something. I hope that's okay. Ooh,
we have 1 hour time for this conversation, so yeah, we're in good timing.
Also ich verspreche, es wird noch spannend. Bitte dranbleiben.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about care and economic disobedience. I am and have been like a kind of anti-debt activist for a long time, and most of my work for the last over a decade has been about debt as a material, as a psychic material, as an emotional material, as a mystical material. And I'm really interested in economic disobedience, but like I've used art to really explore it. And so I wanted to show you two projects that led to the hologram. The hologram is probably why I was invited here today, but I've never gotten a chance to actually talk about the actual like economic disobedience that is embedded in the hologram, which is a peer-to-peer health project. So very quickly, 10 years ago now almost, I worked on a project called Physical Audit, which was supported by Flux Factory, which is a space in New York. And 20 dancers went to 20 banks as a kind of practice. And we had two goals, and one goal was to touch everything in the bank to see if we could get dirt on our hands. Not like dirt corruption, but like dirt, like a form of life. So that second goal was to open collective savings accounts. When we went into the bank, though, me and the 20 dancers realized that we were completely scared. We couldn't move. Oh, they turned my, Try it again.
Perhaps you can say that you were also very active with Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah. Well, yes. I would say I was a little active.
A little
I
active.
learned a lot.
Okay.
I was a baby. I was a baby to, that kind of situation. I learned a lot. But so we touched everything in the bank, but we realized that like actually we were quite frozen when we got there. So we did a bunch of practice sessions where, for instance, 10 people touched an ATM at once, where someone while using the ATM went limp. And what we realized was that we were being obedient to rules that didn't exist. And we were afraid, and we were very, very afraid of authority, but no authority ever came. And so I think this was a really important lesson that there are times when we are obedient when we don't need to be. And there are definitely things to be afraid of, but also there's a lot of room. There's a lot more space than we might know. There's a lot to say about this project. We made a music video eventually out of it. Here's an image where we're touching each other while touching the ATM. And here's an image where we're all petting a dog within the ATM. There are no rules that say that 10 people cannot pet a dog in an ATM. Here, Marilla holds Idalia's hand as she uses the ATM with her eyes closed. There are no rules that you cannot touch another person while using an ATM. Lots to say about that project, but the next project that I wanted to just briefly introduce is Fedora Archive, which is the name of an actor, or the name of a character that I created who inhabited my grad school, who had very, very articulate breakdowns in public in grad school at California College of the Arts, a very expensive private school. And she had very, very articulate breakdowns about debt and about the value of her education and about the lack of clarity about the future and what she was doing while she was in art school. And this is her at her MFA show. She had a studio at CCA, and she had an MFA show, and I didn't. And she painted her walls black. And she showed in her MFA show, she just showed her bio, resume, and her press. And when people came and asked her what her work was, she handed them a document and then handed another document. And when they said, well, what is your work actually? She handed them another document and she said, like, what? Is this not enough for you? And then she would, she would obviously cause a bit of tension. And then at the height of the sort of tension in the moment, she would go to an area of her exhibit where there was a black mat, and she would have a tantrum. And the tantrums were very scripted and very split and very much about exploding the repression that was in the art school. But I think this is another form of economic disobedience, showing negative emotions in corporate scenarios, and that is viral communication. Also, it's a very dense project that I worked on for years, and there's many more things to say about it, but I wanted to bring those up as the sort of some of the precursors to the hologram. And the hologram is a peer-to-peer anti-capitalist health project. And the way that we use economic disobedience in it is that we steal back our time we take our time back away from the economy. We take our time away from work, from self-improvement, from efficiency and from progress and individualism, and we spill it into networked care. Economic disobedience involves everybody giving and getting support, whether they were raised to believe that they could do that or not. And another economic audience is that in this project, we really make sure that it is clear that asking for support doesn't mean that you're weak. Project is viral. I will explain very briefly how. It comes from work that was done at the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki, which is a free clinic that opened at the height of a financial crisis, at the same time as there was a huge influx of migrants to Greece, just as the hospitals were unable to provide the care that was needed because of the financial situation. One clinic, this clinic in Thessaloniki, was experimenting with how to give non-hierarchical care. And so when you went to the doctor there, you were seen by a therapist, a social worker, and a doctor at the same time. And this blew my mind. So the goal of this meeting was to get the incomer, they didn't call it the person who came in for care, patient, they called them an incomer. They wanted the incomer to be able to say what they needed for their own care and well-being, instead of to be prescribed or told by the professionals. Over a long period of time with many different groups of people, we have worked out how to do this as a distributed model, so that instead of having 3 professionals, the person who's receiving care is called the hologram. They invite 3 people to support them by asking them questions. So one person asks questions about mental and emotional health. One person asks questions about social, one person asks questions about physical health. The person who's receiving care, who's answering the questions, we see that person as an expert about their own health and their own story, and as a teacher, a person who can, by organizing their own support, asking for support, and articulating their needs, can teach other people that that is even possible. The people that are asking questions are, whether they're professionals or not, they're never in the role of an expert, they're never giving advice, they're feeling along with the hologram, and they're not trying to save them, to solve their problems, but merely to get really close to understand what it is, what are the conditions of their life and what's going on with them, how do they feel. The project is an endurance project. The goal is to do it over time. So hopefully, hologram meets regularly with their triangle in the same formation, say every season for 10 years. And the goal is a kind of endurance practice, so that we're not trying to solve a problem right now and trying to fix something right now. We're trying to know each other over time and create a real sense of stability and health. In the larger project, the 3 people that are in the role of the triangle, the people that are asking the questions, also need to be cared for. So the hologram's job is not give what they receive, back to the people that support them, but to ask the people who support them how they can get support so that they are also supported. So hopefully the project grows virally. Hopefully the hologram says to each person that is supporting them, like, would you like a hologram also? Would you like to be a hologram? And can I help you to do that? And if not, what kind of care do you want? Because we've learned the hard way during Corona that we really do not want to accept care from people who are not cared for. We need to make sure that everybody's okay. This brings up, I think, the biggest part of the economic disobedience of this project, which is that this is a specific, we're putting pressure on our expectations of money and exchange. So in this project, we're trying to separate giving from receiving. So what is it like to give care without the expectation of being paid back from the person that you're giving it to, not putting them into debt and not putting yourself into a feeling like you're giving because you're going to receive? And then how do you begin to receive care, support, attention without feeling like you're going into debt? And this is really important. This is something that a lot of gift economists talk about, and I think there's so much there that we can learn about. And so in the end, the project is about actually making a culture of care and not actually getting people stuck in a loop. So it's not about pods who just stick together and talk amongst themselves, where the care and the energy gets stuck in a loop. It's about actually like expanding it and growing it and hopefully seeing the project change over time. And it's definitely a project to be taken and used and morphed and practiced by lots of different people, and we're learning as we go. And that's it.
Cassie, could you just please, just for a better understanding, explain what a typical problem would be? So in which situation you could be a hologram, and how people who are not experts might help you? Because now it's very abstract. So if I'm in debt, I don't have anything to eat, I'm living in Greece, so I come to you and I'm the hologram. How does this work?
Well, it's a long-term practice that you can do whether you have a problem or not. It's not about solving problems, it's about becoming sort of long-term, almost like living health records for other people. So if you are in a dire, I think the goal would be to see your situation from 3 different perspectives and pretend. Sorry, there's a big feedback. The goal would be that you are able to long-term support people would be able to search, the sort of the things you need to be okay. But mostly it's about like it being known in the long term, it's not really really not about sort of solving a problem or plugging a hole in a sinking ship, creating long-term support.
Mm-hmm. So would you say it's like about practical social interact, more like symbolic or like an experiment?
At this point, I don't really experiment anymore. A lot of people are using it. It's a type of conversation that is a person to see themselves as a part of their social condition, be able to see the solutions that create, and to be able to make better decisions of other people. It's quite developed as a practice that I call. There's quite a specific way of doing it online and in person, and I think it's really quite point. I used it, for example, throughout a process where I found out that I needed quite a serious surgery to me to sort of figure out how to think about, my organs as they connect to my connect to social systems, as connect to what I eat and the story of my life. And Yeah, I think it's just about sort of being able to integrate, to allow, and to understand that you're connected to other people as you do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Simon's still there?
I'm still here. There was a on that.
Yeah, the sound.
Feedback one.
The sound is really terrible.
Is the sound very bad?
But we just continue. We just try our best.
Okay. How's that?
Great.
Fantastic.
Okay. Well, children, hello. This is a little story that I want to read you, and it's called Once Upon a Who. Once upon a who, there was a little bear whose name was Who the Bear. Now, it could be said that Who, as Who the Bear was known to be, was just another cartoon bear, just ordinary. Just another Rupert bear, just another Pooh. Who was a nobody? Who was just a who? Small and white, clean and bright. Who wore a simple pair of jeans in blue? Jeans just like the ones worn by me or worn by you. So what makes Who so special? Who knows what makes Who who? Is it their golden heart that sparkles brightly in the dark? Or is it that crazy tongue that Who can't control, however hard? Who thinks it's that Who is special because of something that you cannot see? Whose class, whose race, whose gender, whose sexuality? Who knows whose origins, whose nationality? What makes Who so very special? What is Who's identity? Oh dear, oh no, oh who is Who? Who the bear sighs and goes into the world with this question in their mind. But since Who is just a picture in a world of other pictures, it makes the answer seem unusually difficult to find. At first, Who tries everything they can to escape the feeling of being a nobody. Therapy, focus groups. Who redesigns themselves constantly. Who is he? Who is she? Who is us, them? Who is we? Who is behind the mask? Who made Who me? Who do I belong to? Whose image do I see? Who could become anything? If only Who cares enough to see. Who will save us? Who will save who? Who flies, but only privately? Who discovered who in Egypt? Who is whose property? Who conquered who in Africa? Who loves to say, Hukuna Matata. Who took liquids through security? Whose car runs on electricity? Who wants to be a Hoover? Who remembers Hushamp? Who even believes in who these days? Not those hooligans, who says. Who will find love online? Who is only human, only half the time? Who takes revenge on whose behalf? Who is a Huseum, a Hugenheim, a Hufitzi, who is a masterpiece? Who will control their own narrative? But how the hell did who end up here? Who still has hope? Who has no fear? Who still dreams? Go ahead, who, be free. Tired and alone in their endless search for a me, who's lost in a world where nothing is as it seems to be. Nobody expects whose authenticity. Nobody needs who to be real. Who cares if who looks differently to how who really feels? Who cares if who is truly who, when who is who wants to be? And slowly, very slowly, even who starts to agree. It's not all bad, says who to who, that I'll never be 3D.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to kill myself immediately. Because it's so, I mean, I love the story. Winnie the Pooh was the first film I saw. Interesting, it was in the 60s and the projector stopped and the film burned down and I had to be carried out of the movie theater. But Simon, perhaps we start with you with the sentence, it's not all bad. If I look at this fantastic work, which is also at the Fondazione Prada right now as an installation, and you can walk through it on your cell phone. There's an application for it. Do you, as today, do you have any hope for change? This is a personal question just to start.
I don't know how to answer that. I think who is my response? The reason I created Who, which is a total sidestepping of your question, is the idea that things are so absurd and so scaleless and so impossible to penetrate or understand or make sense of that I felt that a Dada response or a hoo-hoo response is sort of the only language left to me. And I wanted to create a language out of this hopelessness. I mean, you've registered, I think you know the answer, which is the project is extremely bleak, but it's presented with like deep pleasure and joy and color, and maybe it's just helpful to explain how it began, which is just a very short story, which I began drawing during the lockdown, the first lockdown, and then I felt really hopeless, and I sort of went to an apocalyptic place, which was to say, well, now it's finally over. We've done it. You know, like the global travel's off the cards. We're not going to be flying around producing. We're not going to be having museums or exhibitions, and we can't meet and all of this stuff. So I said, what kind of artist am I going to be? And I thought, well, at the end of the world, there will be one thing, and I think that's going to be in abundance, and that is burned trees. So I started drawing in charcoal, and sort of thinking, can I do everything in one medium in charcoal? And at the same time, seeing a lot of images through a sort of a space this big, and experiencing, you know, the collapse of belief in everything, in every political system, in every economic system, in any health system, and racial kind of questions rising, erupting, which affect me very personally, gender questions, and everything kind of feeling destabilized and yet experienced as a kind of mood or a picture or a performative gesture online, because we were all locked away. And so I was thinking, how do I deal with the kind of amount of these images that keep coming to me, and not just think of them as pure trash and not be cynical about them, and at the same time reconcile this desire to just hide away and draw in charcoal and respond like Hannah Höch or Kati Kolwitz, or, you know, some other kind of perhaps more expressionist artist to this historical moment. And I realized I could unite the two, the collage, which collage felt like we were living in a collagistic moment. You know, one day we didn't have a pandemic, the next day we did. We were all locked in, we were all locked out. It felt like the world was just collaged over us. And I wanted a body to experience those, and I didn't want it to be my body, because I was also looking at how tied into identity politics every kind of gesture or voice or moment of activism was. And I was like, and I spent my whole life trying to free myself from my political body. So I didn't necessarily want to go back there. So I created a body, and that was the body of this cartoon bear, which I think of as a public body, a vessel, an entity, a town square, a product. So that, I suppose, rather than knowing if it's going to give me hope or not, it's been very dark working with it. It's also been a kind of process of confronting these kind of images that we live with all the time, and thinking, what does it mean if we actually think about them, which actually care about them, and because Who the Bear clearly does. Who the Bear has something to gain from these pictures.
Yeah, I'm sorry for this cheesy question, because I didn't know what to say. I think you did this perfectly. I just feel like Who the Bear. On the other hand, I'm just to try to speed things a bit up. A refugee at some border doesn't have the chance to think about his or her or its identity this way. It's put on him or her. And you as an artist, you could see, I'm just provoking a bit, we could see this as a decadent act sitting in your studio with your technical devices and constructing this postmodern, very philosophical philosophy bear, which is totally, I mean, you really hit the point with it. I don't want to criticize the work, but I totally can connect to it because I have a similar background like you. I really fall in love with this bear because it's like my first bear. There's a lot of things I recognize in the work, but
I think that's quite a very simplistic way to think about it.
Okay,
you know?
Now we're talking.
To claim the claim that, like, I mean, you're creating an image of a refugee on a border. There are, of course, political boundaries. There are forces that act economic and, you know, govern, and bodies that act on humans. But there are many levels to a human, and to imagine, and of course you're not saying this, you're pretty provoking, but a refugee on a border, whoever this fantasy person we're talking about, would probably have a smartphone and would probably be just as indoctrinated or part of an image culture as we are. The point is we all access very similar material in certain regards, and I'm dealing with a kind of fantasy world, or a way in which we project or image ourselves. And part of that, I realized in making the project, was dealing with a largely colonialist white image bank, because that is the way the world.
That's why I like it so much, probably.
That's the way the world has been created and imagined, you know, largely. It's actually not really my world, but it's a world that I feel like I've always been forced to associate with, even when I live in Japan. You know, as a child, has been Western models and Western products and Western kind of. I think what I'm dealing with is not decadent at all. I think everybody has a fantasy. That's what we're born with as a human. Whether you're stuck on a border or not, you have images in your head, and that's what this is dealing with.
I don't think it's decadent either. I was just probing.
I have my decadent moments. Don't get me wrong. That's not always in my work.
But you know, in this question about identity and class, often, you know, those thoughts that you, or the aesthetic, this way of thinking and your aesthetic for activists on a non-artistic level is decadent. You know, like people would say, why don't you just give people money, or why are you burning something out of clay, a little Humboldt forum? What does this change? And I think this is something we should talk about today, how this can create common ground, also with people who are not part of the art business, who are not academic. I hope I'm not too confusing. And Cassie was totally agreeing with Simon, perhaps. Yeah, because you say it's simplistic to imagine a refugee or homeless people, and then the decadence of some artistic practices.
Well, I just think the question is just it's really in the wrong direction, because I mean, I want to live in a world where there's lots of people that can do what Simon's doing, not to take it away from Simon. Like, I just think that the goal is that there are more people with more stability who can, like, live in a way where they have the capacity to use their imagination and dream and play, and that's not like a privilege to be. I don't think it's a privilege to be taken away from anybody. I just think that it needs to be much, distributed much better. And I think I think we should just really need to be careful about the way that we can sometimes use shame or guilt towards people and what they do. And I think what Simon does is really important. And I would, I just think everyone has a story, and how Simon got to be here doing what he's doing, we don't really know, but I respect it. And I hope that, we can work towards making a situation where there aren't people, waiting in line outside of a border, or stuck, in basically tenements or temporary housing, or, stuck at Abu Ghraib. I just think that, we have to work towards making things better for more people, not taking things away from Simon.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree. We have to add stuff. And what comes into my mind, and I'm just trying to find a way out of my horrible question, is that you all work in a speculative way too, right? It's imagining something that hasn't happened yet, that could come. And perhaps we can talk about this idea, about the speculative narratives in your work, if there's any.
Yeah, I think that speculative narratives play a really large role in a lot of works of mine, maybe not. I mean, in this project also, if one were to say that it's a utopian idea to exercise and abolish capitalism, but we're saying that it's not, and that it's realistic, and that's the plan, and we're doing it. But I think that, I mean, no one believes in anything anymore. There's no gods. We're living in turbo-capitalism. There's lots of refugees at the borders and lots of people living in tenements, getting kicked out of them. And very few people are afforded the chance to make such a beautiful work as Simon did with such high production values and show it at Fondazione Prada. So in terms of thinking about how could one imagine a world that is better, where it's more people who have access to amazing possibilities and chances. Yeah, what's speculation, fiction, that's what we have to work with. I think they're really important tools. I also thought it was really interesting that you used the poem format, Simon, because I also found myself writing a poem, but in a very different genre of poem during lockdown. But I did a collaboration with a friend where we wrote a really long, epic, super speculative, utopian, feminist kind of sci-fi poem. And I feel like it's interesting how a lot of artists during lockdown shifted to working with very different media and genres. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of chances in the speculative. There's this really great Ursula K. Guin quote that I think I probably can't get together right now, but saying how under feudalism, also for sure, the peasants could not imagine that nobility would ever be toppled, and yet it happened. And so using speculative methods are some interesting pathways to try and find different ways there.
Yeah, I hear so often that we talk about post-capitalism or the end of capitalism. So how do you as artists deal with economy? And Cassie was building her work on debt, basically. But so if we look at the art system Simon works in, it's the people who run, I'm just a bit flat right now, the 1% who could, or the 2% of collectors and sponsors, big companies, they also run the world, basically. So they make the rules. And artists are a few of the last people in this market who have the chance to communicate with those people who are not cleaning their spaces or working for them. And if you go to an art fair, you always have this very interesting mix of precarious people, successful artists, the same scene you're addressing in your newspaper, right? So how, if we never talk about, if we talk about speculation, I think that's totally necessary. But how do we talk about how production and how things are produced and power also? Simon.
I mean, it's been mentioned a couple of times that the Who the Bear works have a really high production value, which kind of makes me chuckle with inside, because they're all just, mostly of what you've seen are printouts from the computer that I draw on with charcoal or pastel. They're the absolutely lowest production I've ever done. And I have made projects that have very high production, and so it's not that I'm trying to claim that I'm not doing that, but actually I intentionally wanted to work with a very low production as part of a language around what I was doing, but also an economy of what I was experiencing in the time I was making it, which was of course a lockdown. But also at that time, confronting the kind of guilt I would have of like, why am I putting more stuff in the world? What's the point in making a sculpture? What's the point in producing stuff when we're on the brink of everything just being blown away anyway? So one of the few things I could sort of justify to myself was like, well, a printer, like buying ink and printing stuff out and drawing on it doesn't make me evil. I don't think so. But I can also, we also have some kind of free, very high production value assets like Instagram, which we make a trade for, like with our soul and with our property. But, I've immediately thought, oh, Who the Bear can be an Instagram account. Who the Bear can reach a lot of people because these are images, they're flat. It functions in a kind of system that I can piggyback on already. And I can also use, there's different kinds of economies. I was thinking about the idea that the world is already ready-made. The world is kind of turned already. I mean, we talk about the world being meaningless and the destruction of meaning, and Zoe kind of mentioned that. I like to call the world a conceptual artwork. I find it more useful. I find it more pleasurable. But then I say, what's my role when the whole world has turned into the conceptual artwork? And just to qualify what I mean by that, I mean the idea that literally many of the conceptual artworks of the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s have become reality. The dematerialization, branding, which of course kind of began in conceptual art, ephemeral experience economy, all of that which we wonderful artists created has now gone on and turned the world into a nightmare. Where nothing means anything. That's what we prototyped in our studios. And I wonder what the ethics of that means then, to be an artist trying to work in that economy when everything has been done, everything is a product. I say, what if I do the minimum? And at times I'm literally printing things out and drawing bear ears on them, which is like very bleak. It's very economical. It's also intellectually quite economical, AKA stupid. But that doesn't make it a work of less value, because it's about stupidity, but it can also be read in a very dumb way. So I talk so much about this particular work, but the broader point I'm trying to make is that these kind of ideas of value and how they relate to how political a work is have been just so tired for so many years, and I think we're all exhausted by them. Yes. And they don't really relate so much to material value anymore, I don't think, in that sense. I think there's just so many other kinds of economies that we can, and one of the things I'm trying to do is to reuse. So it's a kind of way of recycling what's already there.
I would like to make a remark on this. Thank you. No, I have a microphone.
We have the Madonna phone.
I would like to also stretch out that I invited Simon specifically because I see the potentiality of seeing Who the Bear beautifully, brilliantly defining that labyrinth in which meaning has been lost, representation has been lost, and at the same time there is a way out. There is a way out of thinking beyond that system, and it's been bringing closer to people, at least, or the relation of the images, or how images to relate to us as humans, or in the case of Simon, not only as an artist. And I see the work related Who the Bear to Exorcia Raku, or the hologram, in a very beautiful way, that even though they formulate differently. So maybe I would like to raise a question to the three of you, saying what, just not to reverberate on the first question, but what is this common ground, and how do you want to relate to people? Oh, thank you. How do you want people to interact with your projects? And there is very specific proposals on this, but maybe would it be nice to also define it or repeat it in a way that it's also related to the referentialities and the contrasts that are possible while looking at your practice for the public space, in the public realm, taking the public realm also as the center of it, and connecting it to the others on this panel, maybe. I hope I have raised that.
I think the question was fantastic, but we were talking. We're talking about common ground with people also outside of the art business, outside of the discourse. We were talking about care, homeless people, Just an hour ago, we were talking about right-wing terror in Germany. I totally understand the point. I'm not saying it's decadent, or I'm not. I really appreciate the work of everybody here, but we're also talking on this level of emergency right now. And Cassie's also offering a system of help and care for people. So what I was thinking is, and I'm speaking as somebody who's affected, because I was affected by HIV, the last pandemic. I think we talked about it in the last video chat. And this was when basically Judith Butler just wrote her Gender Trouble. We were coming into this identity politics were forming, and there was art and activism were coming together with General Idea or Grand Fury, ACT UP. This was basically also the beginning of institutional critique, came a lot out of the gay and the queer context. And at the same time, I was precarious, working in the, bohemian art field. My boyfriend was dying, and people were discussing identity issues, and I was really feeling helpless at the time. And I felt estranged from art in the mid-90s when this happened. And I can just imagine how it must be for somebody who is, I'm not talking about some migrants at a border or something, but in Germany, poor, feels like trash, might be gay, perhaps likes art, wants to be part of something. So how do you want people, and this is how I would continue your question, how do you would like an audience that is coming from the outside, which sounds abstract, coming from the outside, but how would you like to find a common ground with people who are not in your world, through your artwork? Because this is what we do.
I would like to respond to that, saying there is no outside. There is this cliche that people that are like Armutsbetroffene, people that are affected by poverty, do not have the same access to the knowledge that we in an active role that we're taking in society in either way, not the way that how deciding to just drop out. There's nothing that determines these people being different than me or you. Wow. It's people are that you can encounter on the streets have had a life. They studied somewhere. They went to school. They had a family. They're maybe reading more than I would do. So
absolutely,
to go out of the tokenizing ideas that
that's not true.
Care cannot, or help is.
This is absolutely not true, and I really have to make a point here. I was living half on the street. I had an affair for 12 years with somebody who was homeless. So I would say there's a lot of places. I was coming from the Deutsche Guggenheim.
Yes, but I'm not
meeting him on a bench.
You.
No,
I'm just insisting in the way that.
But there is a limit of access for people to the art system. True or not true?
There is a way of how exclusivity is being put under pressure to people, that there are ways of entering.
Yes, that's what we're talking about today.
To this knowledge.
But for sure there's massive institutionalized exclusivity, just taking as a point of departure the codes in which language is used and is spoken. I mean, if you're not engaged with the visual arts, and you pick up a press release, your average press release in any gallery, any museum, you'll just be like, oh, what the fuck? And you'll feel ostracized by it. I think that that's also kind of the magic of it. We were talking about the art fairs and the strange mix of the broke-ass artists and then the super rich collectors who got there through their Nazi family money, or other questionable tactics of accumulating capital. And I think that that's also part of the magic for them, that it's super exclusive, that very few people can afford to buy the most famous artists' artworks. But I think that, going back to your question of like, how do you, or was it your question of how do you make something approachable or inclusive for people who aren't from within the bubble?
Yes.
I think that I really like to use a tactic that I also really see in Simon's work, where there's several different levels of approachability and also of understanding of a work. And I can really imagine, I mean, it's phrased as a children's poem, that children really love it for its sake, and that for me, it always feels like the biggest compliment when kids like my work, even when it's about something that's completely inappropriate for children, and then it's good that they don't understand that level of it. But I think that there's always very many different ways to see or interpret a specific work of art, and it's nice when the work is accessible and is penetrable from many different levels and perspectives. And I think that as artists, we can do a lot of things to make that possible and make that happen. And then showing works in non-white cube spaces also really helps.
I just have to put something right. I don't think art has to be accessible. I don't think, I think everybody can do what he or she pleases. I think we need, this is what I said in the beginning, art also needs spaces that are exclusive, and there's no need to be an activist or deal with the situation, but today we're talking about common ground. So I'm not talking about
Is it the art that needs exclusive spaces, or is it just some of the art
the thinking
collectors?
might, you might have to do things that are excessive or not practical, not helping other people. That's not the question.
But I don't think that's a matter of exclusivity.
In art?
Yeah. If art does something that isn't helping people, of course art is justified in not being political and not being activist and being art for art's sake, or art in many different ways.
What I'm trying to say is, how can we find a common ground with everything we're doing in a practical way? I'm not saying make artworks that everybody understands or let everybody into the VIP lounges, but for instance, with Simon, I can see an attempt, also with Kathy, but how do we find a language, or where do we find contact zones where complex things can be discussed with people, for instance, also the German past, Nazi stuff, with people who normally wouldn't talk this way, wouldn't meet other people, and how can we create what Donna Haraway would call situated knowledges, where you have really create a new situation also for people who haven't been included before? Or how would you reach people to change something? I hope I don't sound like a lassie or something, kitschy, but you know what I mean? What Simon basically says is, I'm reproducing the situation. We're all constructed, we're all images. There's no authenticity. So how do we deal with this? How do we make something out of this? How do we make this interesting? Is the question so terrible?
Well, there's no answer, and I don't think, I think when I speak about my work and, the philosophy of the project, it is like the Duchampian Dada, everything is exhausted, it's a repetition. But I think I try to infuse works with energy, and I try to infuse it with sincerity, and to approach creating, creating a spectacle or creating something that's visually stimulating and visually or very haptic. And so, one of the ideas specifically with this was to go completely against what we talk about of this image being traded and easily replicable, and make something very handmade. But trying to answer those kind of massive questions feels like a responsibility that's far too big, and yet is the question that artists are always asking themselves, but is a consequence of another kind of neoliberal economy that expects artists to solve problems or have answers to things. Everyone feels shit that we're in a state of emergency, and no amount of projects, clay firing or collaging is going to stop the seas from rising and engulfing us, or from violence taking place on borders. That's just not going to happen. Once someone is through that border, or whatever's floating on top of that water at the apocalypse, is more of something that I think as an artist you can control, which is to say, what do I want to say? How do I want to represent or funnel or filter everything that I'm seeing, and how do I work as hard as possible to make this as close to my experience as possible? And that's when the political comes in, because it's not just about going, I'm an artist, I'm in my studio, and whatever I think and feel is relevant. Is when you realize you're a political body and you go, well, my experience is then the subject of the work, and how I experience and how I move through the world is important, and then the work is going to reflect that somehow. And those are the kind of confrontations that at least I have when I'm making work in the studio, a process that is about detaching myself from the world, but also thinking about how to act in it. It's very traditionalist, perhaps it sounds, but posing those kind of questions is very, I don't know how far it leads in terms of kind of getting to an active discussion.
Okay, but you're also talking about like colonialism of images in your speech. So, this is something you throw into the discussion.
Maybe we can also have let other questions enter. We have 10 minutes before.
Perhaps I just give up.
No, don't. But maybe someone has questions here that we could.
No, perhaps I'm sorry. I hope I didn't destroy my first panel, and forgive me for being so simple. But perhaps we have a final statement. The question is not there, but so what's common in the ground, people?
I guess.
Impossible question. I would say clay is common in the ground. It's found almost everywhere. Clay. Tool.
Clay is in the ground. So the question was for the two of you, because this is what we are discussing today, just to...
So...
Or where do you see...
can you hear? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to figure out what the entry point is to find a kind of interesting ground between the three practices that we're presenting here today. And I think the thing that I'm really struck by is like the overwhelming feeling from Simon's work out, like basically being a person in a state, living in a sort of state of emergency, but without any power. And I think, Oliver's been asking a little bit about power in the art world. And then for Zoe, it sounds like there's this search for like different forms of collective power. And I think like the thing that I see as like in relationship between all the work is like this moment of just like not knowing who or what to be, and like how to be a person in this particular moment, which has been revealing what has been broken for a long time. And I guess I think it's important to say that, like, for some people, the world has been broken down for a long time. I mean, I know that from living and working with different groups of people, that like poverty and broken systems is nothing, and racism and borders is nothing new for really most people in the world. But I think for some of us it is, and it's pretty gut-wrenching. But I guess like the thing that I think art can be really good at is sort of like telling a common story, and being able to sort of like see a snapshot of where we are in someone else. And that's the beauty of the hologram, is that you get to actually see yourself in someone else. And that seems really important right now, because I think well before the pandemic, like we were living in a really atomized way, competitive and individualistic, and kind of forced into that type of alienation. And that's not something that really, that anybody chose. We didn't want to live this way, but we do live this way. And so I think that it's this particular moment that we're in after coronavirus where that got even more emphasized, that we just need lots of different ways to sort of see ourselves in each other. And it seems like that's also in the ground, in the clay, in Hubert, and it's definitely sort of the central component to the hologram is really getting to sort of like feel as if you're in a shared world together, that like by understanding somebody else's story, you can really understand your own. And yeah, I guess the last thing I would say about power is that I think that we were very skeptical of power. Like power is what kills, and power creates a lot of suffering and inequality. But I think there's also good forms of power, like the type of power that Zoe's trying to cultivate. I think like there are good forms of power, and that it happens when we see ourselves like as part of something, or as connected to other people. So I think like as much as we critique like the power that is misused and toxic power and power over, I think it's also really interesting and important to see, like, I think that's something that's like interesting about art, is like it allows you to see somebody's magic powers. So that's about it.
Simon.
Oh God, it's so much pressure. Summarizing.
You hate this panel.
Oh, I don't hate this panel. I think you're over-apologizing, Oliver. I think it's been totally fine. Except for that terrible first question that will...
No, I think sometimes it's good to start with...
It's going to remain on your digital history forever.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed of it, because I'm
cancelled,
I'm like Who the Bear. I'm just changing all the time.
Who is cancelling who? Who is cancelling you? I don't have a statement. I don't have a statement. I'll answer a question, but I don't have a summarizing statement.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps, I don't know, I just hand it over to Maria, back in control, everything. I wanted to say something to Cassie with what my desperate point is. I'm going to AA, and I have a sponsor, and we talk about my alcoholism and my personal situation, and that's something different. And I'm really afraid of living in a world that Simon basically shows in Who the Bear, that you kind of help to experiment with each other, not try to fix things, but to wait for the revolution to come, for the production matters to change, and that we do this in a symbolized, ritualized way, while people at the same time, and I know I sound like terribly conservative, but people are in need at the same time. And there's so many things going on where we're talking about compassion and helping others. And it also has something to do with changing the economy and the production and everything. The art world is entangled. And I'm totally on your side. I don't think we have to fix things. We have to stay with the trouble, but we have to talk about this very unpleasant side of our activities, of being, practitioners not paid, or working. I work for Deutsche Bank. I can't say anything, and I also feel stuck. It's not that I feel on the right side or I'm embarrassed because you don't do enough for refugees, you know. But how do we talk about these paradoxes and how do we make something out of it that works and gives something to people? Says the biggest narcissist. Okay. Perhaps we just open the panel up for questions. Are there any questions?
If I cross?
Yeah, perhaps you want
I very much appreciate this conversation and the discussion, because I think it is helpful to realize that just one buzzword you used before was the exhaustion. This is probably what we share all in these times. That's the common ground, I think, which is there. And it kind of forces us to rethink the whole system and also to kind of reinvent ourselves somehow. We probably don't have an answer to that yet, but this is probably what we can say of the last month, that this is what we share.
I just want to make the comment that I think you shouldn't feel too guilty about your position as an artist as long as you pay your tax. Because you're a citizen too. I don't know if I have to explain what I said.
I think you have a point. I see there's someone else trying.
Yeah, I don't expect any detailed answers. Maybe it's just about, is there in your artistic work, if it's a successful part of your work, a kind of level from this you say, okay, I will share every dollar income that will be above 5,000 euro a month or something like that. Because if you talk about revolution and killing capitalism, or maybe there is no woke capitalism, then there has to be at least a individual top-level income thing. I have something like that, but just in mind.
This question was addressed to the three artists.
But I think Sarah already said, like, you know, if you pay your tax the rich, I'm totally with you. Okay, so how much do you, how much do you have to earn until you pay something for the poor? Be honest.
Split it, and I would have a kind of curve, and I would decide, like, if I have more than 1,500 euro a month, for example, I would give something, and then I would, like, I do it like tax system works, but a little bit harder.
Yeah, you see, but my insurance is, because I earn a lot, is 1,000 a month.
Mine is 0 because I don't earn.
Yeah.
I don't earn so much or have prospects of ever earning so much that this would be something realistic, that I would have so much that it would make sense to give some away. But I definitely think a very important first step would be to abolish the right to inherit. If we did that, we wouldn't have to worry about making too much money and then having to give it away, because things would sort themselves out.
I don't know if you want to ask the question, Simon and Cassie, if you would give money after having earned a certain amount to a good case or to the poor.
All of my work involves redistributing all the money that I can. I don't make very much money. I mean, I'm constantly critiquing whatever institution that I've been invited to join. So it's not really like profitable work, though. I do think like it's a big part of my practice to like give people money for things that they would normally not be paid for. So things like paying people to sort of sleep or to dream. In the physical audit project I showed you, I gave all those dancers, all the money that I received, I redistributed it in the project called Fedora Archive. Like I paid my debt payments instead of to the government, I gave them to Lara Gold, the actor. And in the hologram, when we receive money, it gets redistributed to all the people that are involved in it as like facilitators and stuff. So I hate money. I think that there should definitely be like instead of a minimum income measurement, there should be a maximum income. Like nobody should be able to earn a certain amount of money, because I think generally, you don't need that much. And so definitely into redistribution.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have to say I don't have any old age insurance, and I will be broke next year when I stop working. So it's my richness is not so. I'm not so rich. I hope. I don't know. This is a weird ending for this panel.
But we have still 5 more minutes.
We still have 5 more minutes.
So my question would be, as artists argue very seriously when talking about their own work. My question would be, is there any common ground on your work, let's say, what I would call irony or humor?
Were you present?
This was a question for the artist.
Are you treating with the subject of irony, humor?
Okay, the question is, are you...
Any common ground?
Okay, are you dealing with irony or humor?
Can I spare the artists from this question? Because I think that we spent 1.5 hours seeing that their practices are an offer for a common ground that is not existing. Maybe I can also contextualize this for you. Again, I don't know if you came later or not, but all 3 artists are looking into the way of how the power of images and how everyone can serve themselves or are obliged to deal with this. These are 3 practices that have engaged with the pandemic from the very first moment, as epistemologically, socially, and metaphorically, if you want.
My question is a little bit provocative.
Yes, but I don't know where you're going, so I just tried to jump in. Maybe the artist would like to answer that question, but I think it's been already said enough on that regard.
I really would like to have a nice ending for this panel, that we all go home and feel okay at least. I'm sorry for spoiling the day. Yeah, I think I just have to stay with my own trouble.
It's a good.
Yeah, thank you. What?
Staying with our own trouble, everybody, seems to be a common ground somewhere.
Yeah, the trouble is a common ground.
Well, I guess accepting that there is disruption and accepting that it's never going to be the same sentiment and that we cannot need to share the same
But I have to say something about this. You know, I before Arts of the Working Class picked up the common ground issue, I was writing also in the pandemic a piece about common ground. And I really imagined, in a very naive way, that artists would squat places, you know, like digitally or a house, or would do neighborhood work and all this stuff. Because I really see, when I'm on the countryside and I'm talking to my neighbors, or that there's a big space where you can meet people and discuss. And I sound naive, but there has to be something different than the market, the academic discourse, and the government. So I was actually talking about a physical common, you know, a place where we can meet. I don't know if you like the idea, Maria, because also it's not only digital, it's also local. And you need a place where you meet other people, I think. You know, I'm on the countryside, I'm surrounded by right-wing people. My neighbors are anti-vaxxers, they vote AfD. And for me, it's like a constant constant struggle to talk to them, but I have to stay there. And I would be happy if artists would come out or other people and talk to those guys too, you know? And this is what the next 2 days also will be about. And so I hope there will be some practical moves too. And as artists or writers, we're also citizens. So
we're here in the right place.
One thing, I mean, we're operating in with different audiences in many ways, like the three of us, but we're, I see what we're doing, all three of us, is some kind of community work or reaching out or trying to create the participatory feeling or a engagement or an involvement. But I think that there's so many, there are so many art worlds, you know, there's so many worlds to be an artist in. And I can say from my side, what I'm trying to find is common ground within a kind of mass media landscape. And you could say there's a poverty to my ambition of staying within that world and that it doesn't spill into real activism. That's okay, I can take that critique, but it's also, I think, for example, mass media or this kind of hyper image culture is here to stay for the foreseeable future. So I'm trying to understand how within that, how can I give audiences something better? I think what I do is better than most of the mass media product. I think it's more nuanced. I think it's more interesting. And I think it's as accessible. So if we want to talk about, how to create a common ground, I might be operating within a kind of system that is more visible, more mechanisms. I think I offer quality product, high quality experience that offers more, that offers a way to interrogate it as well. And so to kind of circle back as well to the idea of, how much money should one earn, or what do you do? The way in which I've operated is, there's never been a huge surplus because I put almost everything back into my work. But I think my work is kind of the best place to spend money because I think it's great and it's the thing that I'm functioning with every single day. So I certainly wouldn't think of there being a cap with which I would have to stop earning money, because that would put in some ways a cap to the ambitions that I have for, in this moment, Who the Bear, that I think could become something that is a common ground, something that, in a way that's what I'm trying to find with this project, is something that is a being and a brand that is hyper political and totally vacuous, is a product, but a personality, a mascot, and just watch that operate. And part of that is also letting go of some control over how that figure is going to be interpreted. So that's sort of where I'm trying to find common ground, I suppose, but it's within a specific niche, a big niche, but it's still a niche.
This was a perfect answer, and this was really a relief.
Did that feel positive?
Yeah, totally.
Good.
It's very precise.
Okay, I think we can go into the break now. Thank you so much, Oliver, for moderating this conversation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to Zoe, Simon, and Kathy for this.
Thank you very much for coming back. I'm very happy that there's quite so many of you here, in spite of all the restrictions that G3 has brought with it. I'm very happy to welcome Johannes Paul Rether, who will be talking about his work, but also about his work as professor at the Academy in Nuremberg, Academy of Fine Arts in Nuremberg, and as the head of a new study program which has clear connections and links to what is public. J.P. Rether is an artist and professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Nuremberg. In his artistic work, he looks after a system of constructed identities, avatars, older identities, and self-sisters that appear in various places in public space. And there they research, teach, and tell stories. These so-called A-life forms, transformella, protectorama, or swarm beings, you find out they challenge conventional assumptions about identities, bodies, and technology. Works and performances by Rether were shown, amongst others, at the 9th Berlin Biennale, at the Friderizianum in Kassel, and at the Transmediale 2017 in Berlin. Recent solo exhibitions have taken place in Transition Gallery in Glasgow, Ludlow 38 in New York City. At the Academy of Fine Arts, Peter directs a newly created postgraduate course, Live Art Forms, and it focuses on performative and aesthetic practices across disciplines, the public and digital forms, within the visual and performing arts and beyond. This is quite an exciting starting point to see what does this means in reality, even though it's only starting right now, what it will mean. But first of all, I'm saying Johannes, and the informal address of Du. I would like to ask you how do you see this work as a professor on the background of your own work? How do you define this?
Yeah. Hi.
Well,
Hallo.
Hi. I am very happy that I can be here in this very complicated double role that I have to balance in my practice, in my work, where I have different identities. So I feel quite comfortable here, and I'm very happy to be able to speak here in Nuremberg before a larger audience, because a course of studies was conceived 2 years ago, but it's just starting right now. So I'm very happy I can be here today. And this double personality role, thank you. This double function of academic work and artist work that you had already mentioned before, that is a very difficult area of tension. It's very tension-laden because people usually think that in these areas professors who are artists, they have an inherent contradiction between their own artistic work and the pedagogic work they have to make, and there's a distinction made between them quite clearly. And here I would like to say that if you have a look at our work in the different identities that I have, that I call light form, that are artificial, and how they walk through the world and they teach, I think that is not very different from the identity that I have as a professor, because I don't see it as a very natural part of myself yet. So I think that you have different identities and different roles that you mix and that intermingle. And as a professor, maybe you have a different point of view or a different approach, or you have an each one teach one approach that I believe is something very useful, because as a group we can all learn a lot of each other as artists. And within the work of the artist, you have lots of pedagogical work that influences our work as an artist as well. So the basic premise that I'm going forward here from is that maybe these distinctions that we make are not that different after all.
In science fiction, or rather in science, we talk about the uncanny valley, when avatars, for example, artificial beings, whatever artificial means, if they come very close to a natural, so that's quite uncanny, that it's quite scary. Your performances are temporary interventions, confrontations with a very present scenario. You are there, the figure is there, but at the same time there's another level, an additional level, which has something to do with media levels. And I'm asking you because I imagine that this kind of uncanny valley it could be a challenge if you're starting to teach.
Well, yeah, maybe I can tell you a bit more about these uncanniness when I try to kind of like combine with a creature. I'm trying to find a picture to demonstrate this. We have the swarm creature Karachi in Pakistan. And I'd say that, as you see it here, this creature is not that uncanny if you look at it, or that eerie, but you can see that you have different camouflage, so they're so colorful that they are not hidden, but they shine over everything else. They shine above all the other human creatures that are around them, and if you have a look at them, they, you'd almost ignore the other people. You just don't really see them anymore because they are not part of the convention. If you look at this, you'd think, okay, this is maybe advertising that's being filmed right now or something special. But what you see here in this picture, you can see that you have cultural industrial forms and packagings. And I think that's quite interesting, that you basically have a mixture of the audience, of people, of spectators in public space that are not as prescribed as it would be in a very specific cultural or artistic institution, where we have a very specific kind of audience, a very highly educated kind of audience. And here, in this case in Pakistan, we have all kinds of different points of access to this audience. Often it is misinterpreted. It is almost impossible to interpret, and that is something that is for me quite uncanny, because it's uncanny of seeing it how it's produced on stage or on the artistic space, and people assume that other people know what they are seeing there. So it's like a horror movie. It's something that's eerie, and I think it's really interesting to see a certain authenticity, produce truth, and to have these creatures go into the public space, intervene, integrate themselves there, and then they're just there with their own their inability to be interpreted, and they confront it. Quite interestingly, that's exactly what most customers don't want to be. They don't want to be advertising or a spectacle, or companies being at a corporate event. This form of cultural event that artists, they try to distance themselves from that. But I think it's very interesting to see how you can create spaces or characters who can transgress these borders and make them fuzzy. And perhaps the spectators will have a question in their heads. What is it what they're looking at? And that's what I would like to see, is people ask themselves, what are they looking at, instead of pretending that they're scared.
Well, the thought of unreadability, I can understand that straight away, it makes sense. And I ask myself, what does this mean for your study course, where people want you to be readable, they want something explained to them. So we live in a postgraduate master's course, so people have graduated in art, so they've looked at performance and public art, and so they have an education in this field. What kind of students do you expect? What artistic socializations will be their background? So this unreadability that you described, is that a factor that you'll be working with when you teach?
Yes, definitely. I believe that when you're teaching in the pedagogic space, in the academic space, illegibility or non-interpretation is not very good. I think that the responsibility that I have as a person, as a teaching person, is the priority here, that I need to be able to teach and communicate to the young artists what they're supposed to do and supposed to learn. So this ambiguity is an oscillating, it takes an oscillating form as it has in public space, sure. But if you have a look at a course of studies, and when they asked me to create this course of studies, and you know there's something you need to perform, if you have to think about what is public, the term of public, how can you reproduce it? How can you make it reproducible, replicable? And then you have to look back at other definitions of what is public. And I think it's really important to see what public is, what publicity is. I think that something that is public is multiple. It's a plurality. It's where we have new questions that keep arising. Especially today, for example, and that's why this course of studies, it does not have a defined terminology of what a public space is, that the public space should repeat these definitions. But we should see it more like a platform or a stage on which the own definitions of what public art is, the definitions of the students, can be expressed there. We have the immersion, the creation, the continuous creation. I know it's very theoretical now, but in simple terms, we do not have any fixated forms, no historic definition that is defined as something that's public, that is something defined as performance, but that we're going to have a look at how things are done and how it's represented. And that's going to have an influence on how things are going to be done in future. And for me, when it comes to the embodiment of this terminology, of this definition of what this course of study is, that was very important for me. That we do have a theoretical and a conceptual foundation, but still, you don't know what's going to get out of it. So you still have some kind of illegibility or unpredictability. We're not going to have a look at what has been, but we're going to look at what can be. Can you understand that?
Absolutely, but still for me the question arises, who do you think your students will be or should be? Who will work with you on this emergence? Who will maybe, the second part of my question, is this maybe a type of a community you're creating where people will be coming with very different perspectives?
Yeah, I believe that is one of the fundamental and very concrete embodiments of forms of this course of studies. Because it is a postgraduate course of studies, so that means that we have people who had already studied something else and they come from the most wildly varying courses of studies. Maybe one person was a lawyer and just came out of legal school. I'm just looking at the first generation. One comes from legal school. And then we have another student who studied communications design, and a third student studied museology and history. So we can see that they come from backgrounds that are not very related to art, actually. And then we have people who have practical artistic experience. And of course, we need to see when they apply, they need to present examples of their work, as with any other academy, a portfolio. And sometimes you have a biography, a course of studies where people cannot really define. In the beginning, people say, "Okay, we would like to do this," and then later on, when they were doing their course of studies or they were learning a profession, they noticed, oh, I actually would like to be more of an artist. And that has been in my experience as well. As an artist, I studied at the UDK in Berlin. It was a very classical course of studies, very classical art school, fine art school. And in the Arts Academy, I started doing performances very late in my academic career. where maybe like 10 or 20 years ago, many of the performance artists back then, they didn't start doing performance art until later in their course of studies because it's not part of the basic curricula or the basic medium, like for example painting or sculpting. So that's why it is something that's very open, very illegible, so to speak. So here in this course of studies, we have many different biographies that are coming together. It's a very heterogeneous group of people, of students, and that is the basis.
What role will digital media play? I'm asking you this because there's one aspect that I find is making me a bit skeptical. I imagine that there will be people who work there in the postgraduate course. Maybe it's a bit of a romantic worldview. I always thought of an art academy as a kind of protecting space, protecting against the public, so to speak. So you're not in the bright light of the public, but that you are producing on a small scale with people who are working on similar things, so you can fail without failing publicly and getting a sort of starting to question the meaning of it all. So if your students or some of your students say, okay, I do an Instagram channel about my experience with JP Reta live work forms, and you turn up in some Instagram selfie situations, I'm really exaggerating, so that everything is streamed, what you're just really developing, how would you cope with that?
Well, I consider myself a boomer, basically. But I think they do have much more media competence than I do have. That's one of the prerequisites. They know how to deal with their Instagram feed much better than I would. I think they had their first crisis before I had it. I do trust that they know how to deal with their narcissism or psychoses in the internet. They would be much better at doing that than I would. So that's why I do not see myself as an authority at all. What I do think we could contribute is what the question on digital technologies. I think there's a difference between digital technologies and digital media. And if I have a look at my work, I think you can only see it on the bottom of this creature. No, you can't see it, it's too light. But here Transformer Malur is wearing, it currently is in IKEA and is wearing a strap-on mini computer. Basically, it's from this mythology of these very complex creatures with very complex machinery, and it is using it. It's wearing on its own body, and it's a DIY technology. And then we also have head-mounted devices or strap-on digital devices. So we're seeing machinery and digitality that is in connection with the body, and that's something that we're also looking at and we're focusing on during the course of studies, because we do believe that when it comes to performance technologies, performance digital technologies, it is quite a relevant topic. So I believe that if we have a look at all these Instagram feeds and what you can see from the from TV, radio digitality, that was kind of like the forebears. I don't want to focus on that much, but we want to work on emotion capture, where the bodies are transformed into digital data. We have strap-on devices, head-mounted devices, wearables. That means digital devices that you can actually wear on your body, and one central role is of course the smartphone, which is basically a nexus, a miniature computer that can quantify and read out all of this information, has all the control mechanisms and all the questions that arise from there. So this is just a different line we're looking at.
Now, could you understand it in such a way that you're doing criticism of the media in the sense of a media critic? More like Frankfurt School, TV. critics Instagram as a form of, we heard about it, as a form of social media, Arc de Triomphe and Christo, multiplying a mechanism for works of art, completely forgetting about the historic background. This is all happening in. I can't really ask about the study course because it's only starting now, but I can ask you artistic work, and my impression is that you exaggerate and you recombine things that we know, head-mounted gear of people documenting their skiing.
So you had sometimes we had this Google worked out, and we try to have a market context, and in this market context, I remember this one image where you had kind of this device with lots of different smartphones, and this character that you are in that moment, this multiplication that you can represent with that. And that's something that you can also do only with this critic. And if you try to criticize it, well, sometimes it would be kind of lame. Did I understand that correctly? Well, let's see how I can navigate this. If we have a look at the question when it comes to criticism, maybe critical or political work here, it's something that I have to ask myself as well. It's questionable. It's something I need to deal with and think about. I wouldn't say it's irrelevant, but the technology that you described, the recommendations, the illegibility, and in combination of how things are produced. These are terms or emergence proceedings that we are quite close to. There are more, and so the criticism of the cultural industry and mass media, the creatures that I'm trying to use here to represent ourselves, that's not their preliminary function. But I am also trying to have a different perspective, where we have to fundamentally ask and question what your self is and what your body is. And we're trying to get a different spin on that, where we say that the ideology of mass culture it's not something that I know about everything, but maybe you're trying to have a more of an introspective perspective. And look, instead of criticizing others, criticize yourself. Or instead of boycotting the mass media, maybe just have some kind of aversion against the objectification that you can see in it. So it's a transition. It's a bit difficult to put into words because it's a difficult concept, but my impression is that it's not about denouncing something as being lame, but making it more current, to update it, so to say. That we are living in a moment where biotechnology, reproduction technology, all of that is quite present. The critical art project called it the Flash Machine. It's a very different technological relevance than visual digitalities. And at the beginning of the 2000s, we thought that these spectacles, this culture of mass digitalization, that it emerged and it was hiding what was going on in the areas of biotechnology. That was one of the theses of the critical art ensemble. I do think it sounds a bit paranoid, but if you have a look at Facebook and all the attention that the social media receives compared to what the attention that reproduction technology receive. I'm speaking about surrogate industries, all the freak shows, so to speak, or the things that are labeled as a freak shows by biotechnological innovations. Then I would take sides with those who say that biotechnology is a more fundamental thing because it is immediately related to technology and the body. Because it's something, you can take your out the battery and then it's broken.
Theory is really more and more scary and current. If I think of Elon Musk, if I think of now starting to think that this car is really only just a diversion. He's about something completely different, a kind of neo-colonial thrust into space, as in Elysium, the science fiction film. The rich people will live in space and everybody else will be working on space, on Earth, so they can live there. That was just a short remark, but what this reference to critical art ensemble also makes me think of something else. I looked at your performance, the Transmediale. This is a media story. There's a media archaeology almost. So the history of the new media can be looked at as a history where you try to come to kind of conclusions for the future use of media. Do you have a level in live art forms where you want to do media archaeology?
No, that's usually what gets lost when you have, if you want to produce something of that sort, or propose a concept in that direction. The focus has to be on legibility. People who are studying there, they're not part of a learned experiment. They're young artists, and they have a right to get this pedagogical guidance. It's not as fluffy as it might seem, but it has a very specific pedagogic shape and form and structure. And this concept that I presented there, where things are explained to people, but when it comes to the courses themselves, we have a theoretical part. Kerstin Starkemeyer is one who does that at the Academy. She teaches art theory and art history, and we also have dramaturgical courses, and Tamara Antoniewicz, starting today. She's here for the first time. Hello there. She is the one who is in charge of drama lessons and drama teachings. And then we have, we're going to invite 10 different artists per year to come here and do some mentoring, face-to-face mentoring in small groups or individual mentoring with our students. And that's it, basically. So the course of studies cannot do the same thing as a media historical or an archive.
I didn't think that you should do archive work or doing some sort of investigative media archaeology, but rather in the sense of looking at how you could use this as a sort of teaching material in a discussion, how you, in the sense of, as I thought before, that you look at older technologies, just obsolete technologies. There's this thesis that both McLuhan and Benjamin, that the just obsolete media are the media of art at that moment. What's thought to be supposedly obsolete is taken out again and applied to the now and the future of media.
Yeah. I would agree, but I would have separated from the technologies that are obsolete or maybe are even associated with taboos. For example, ritual technologies, or technologies of reflection, of knowledge production in the Western context in which we were socialized. Perhaps they seem strange at first that we include them in the course of studies. And let these concepts also be presented in this platform.
Und es hat den einfachen Hintergrund, dass
And the reason is quite simple. It's not us who are interested in that. There are thousands of artists out there who are working with these ancient technologies again, with these overhauled technologies, these obsolete technologies, and there is a reason why they are relevant and have become relevant again. But from my perspective, what I do not think is very respective is media archaeology of the 20th century. Where you have a very detailed dive into that. For me, that's not very relevant, at least not for what we are trying to create. But it's just not our priority. I'm not saying it's illegitimate, it's just that if we go into technology and we have to look at social technologies, and maybe the pre-modern forms.
Where, of course, this is an aspect that I find very exciting, but also quite ambivalent. I'm trying to sketch why, because that has a history too. Theosophy, anthroposophy, these started existing in the 20th century, early 20th century, which thought they were do ritual techniques, alternative knowledge, shamanist technologies, and you know what I'm leading up to, at least in the German context, this, in a very scary way, showed that it had an almost fluent transition to fascistoid. I don't have to start with the Querdenker, anti-vax people in Germany, but in the recourse of shamanism or of particular traditional techniques and forms of knowledge, there is this strange connection that all of a sudden people are going there. This is like blood and soil. We need that in order to exaggerate a bit.
Wow. Okay, it's not that I don't know what to answer, but I'm afraid that I will diverge into a political discussion. Because yes, it is a very important question, it's a legitimate question, but the question is how do we deal with the modern fascism? How can we deal with their expressions and the tendency of these fascist movements? They have a look at the rationalization of Western modernity, and that's their essence, that's their core. And that's something that we can find in the industrial system. We have the national borders, all of these things that they think that back in that old day everything was better. And that's something that we would have to look into more detail. But I think if we have a look at it from a more general perspective, in the end, we're talking about common shared knowledge and actions, how you can take arms against, how can you protect yourself against these things. But as a head of a course of studies, is something I cannot answer that question. I can only offer technologies and platforms so that the young artists can think about these topics and see how they can process them. And this is a form of togetherness where we are sharing the same spaces in the same rooms, and that's quite important. And I think that you can differentiate that from witchcraft, for example, in Europe in the 15th century, from the capital, that you can exercise that. Here we're talking about we're near to Bamberg, and it's a history that can influence what our work and what we're doing. And you don't really have to go into the theosophy of the 19th century. You can go way further back. We have ancient knowledges that are important for us again now, because we're currently in the process of destroying our planet. And with the help of fossil fuels, for example, we caused the climate crisis. So we are trying to find answers how we can contribute to that as an artist. Maybe just let people know that we need a different idea of technology, different cosmological ideas.
Ich würde jetzt gerne,
I would like to, I've just found out to my horror that time is quite advanced. I would like to give you the possibility of opportunity of asking questions.
Ja, da gehen gleich die Hände.
But we need a microphone.
Haben wir noch ein Publikumsmikro oder soll ich das hier mit rübergeben? Da kommt noch ein Publikumsmikro, sehr schön.
We have an audience microphone.
Can I say in English?
Sure.
Can you comment, please, on the
Darf ich das auf Deutsch sagen? Könnten Sie über die Genderdimension Ihrer Performances erzählen? Ich habe eure Performances noch nie live gesehen, aber ich habe die Sisters schon mal gesehen, die Sister-Altäre und einige der Figuren dort.
In an unreadable fashion that would
da kann man auch nicht wirklich so herausfiltern oder verstehen. Deswegen wollte ich gerade fragen, was wäre das im Sinne der Weiblichkeit? Also wie sieht es mit der Genderdimension aus im körperlichen, im Menschenkörper, wie es so im Zusammenhang ist?
Ui. I'm not sure if I understood your question.
Ich bin mir nicht sicher, ob ich die Frage.
English, right? So you understand?
Yeah, or German.
I'm not so sure if I understand your question right because there's one which is the. I don't know how well you can read them now as degendered beings. There's definitely that. An active vector of these beings to not fit neatly into a category of binary genders. However, I do believe that these beings cannot be separated from the sites that they appear in. And these sites are heavily gendered. Like if you look at this one, for example, this is IKEA. Again, I think I have a lot of IKEA photos today. But also one of them is in the Apple Store, which is two completely different gendered spaces, or like a mountaintop, or a Mensa. And I would claim that these beings appear in certain spaces that evoke a certain way of acting, and since they act not accordingly to what's supposed to be, they also evoke a degendering of the place. And I would like, at least I would like that. So I hope that it's not to be read as classical drag, where it's like a sort of non-conforming gender performance, but more like us, like putting the question of gender at the site, out what the visitors can see in this moment. Does that answer this a bit?
Yeah, thank you. But the idea of self-sisters does not, you don't feel that instead of a degendering element has a feminization, an element of feminization.
Okay, that's what. Yeah, no, yes, definitely. That's coming from my like sort of assigned at birth gender of male. That's definitely elements of drags that I call them self-sisters. So that's a feminization of myself as other. Yes, I would agree to that. Do you mean that, or is that?
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm proud of that.
Ich gehe zurück auf Deutsch und ich würde mich extrem gerne gleich bei dir in diesem Studiengang einschreiben. Das hört sich wirklich unglaublich interessant und spannend an. Meine Frage geht so ein bisschen in so eine Richtung, die du ja auch angesprochen hast, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, würde mir irgendwie noch als eine andere Person irgendwie so einfallen, diese proto-feudalistische Ideen und so
Prototype ideas and these ideals.
Und auf das Bild zurückkommen,
and
das du gezeigt hast in Karachi. Du bist so von einer Gruppe von Personen, du bist unlesbar.
You are
und diesen Begriff der
unreadable.
Unlesbarkeit finde ich sehr, sehr
And this
produktiv und kann viel
unreadability, I think, is very
damit anfangen. Habe aber festgestellt, dass diese Unlesbarkeit ja immer vor einem ganz bestimmten Hintergrund irgendwie so stattfindet. Und dass das ein Unterschied ist, ob man bei Ikea in Berlin ist oder in
does make a
Karachi
difference if you're in Ikea in Berlin or in Karachi.
Da stellt sich so für mich so die Frage,
And so
auch
the question I have, if you have a look at the public spaces and you have all these countries that work differently, and the access to technology and the permission to use certain technologies are different from one place to another. So how can you deal with these differences?
Of
course, this is an important problem that you've been addressing. I think in my entire practice, the claim is to have a truthful interactional practice, and failure is
macht sich daran fest. Ich glaube fast, dass es so ein bisschen sowas ist wie,
it's like,
so eine Selbstsabotage oder
like
so, sich dem auszusetzen, dass es unmöglich ist, auch diese Form der nach vorne getragenen, vielleicht rhetorischen Werte des Westens am Strand von Karachi dann auch umzusetzen, sozusagen, weil die Class Differences through the roof sind. Und dann sind wir noch nicht in der Frage von Sicherheitsdiskussion und in der Frage Gender.
and safety and gender.
Auf der anderen Seite,
and
sozusagen, was ich dann Psychorealität dieser
what
Wesen
I call
nenne,
psychoreality of these
sowas wie eine erweiterte oder
are a bit like an extended
distorted oder disjunct Reality im Verhältnis zu dem, was ich Common Reality nenne, also allgemeine Realität.
General reality.
Lässt sich eigentlich dann an so symbolischen Ordnungen entlang verfolgen, wo der Strand in Karachi ein Punkt wird in einem größeren Netzwerk von sogenannten Corridors, in dem Fall, die Handelsbeziehungen des chinesischen Belt and Road Projects eigentlich sowas wie nachvollziehen. Das muss man dann, glaube ich, in dem Moment auch mit verstehen, und wir haben große Sorge getragen, dass selbst die Menschen, die dort dazukommen, so ein kleines Blatt kriegen und das sehen, warum das
sheet so they know why this performance happens. So the question, who can do what, will start appearing. So if this
psychoreal an den Belt and Road Corridors von Xi Jinping entlangläuft,
in its psychological reality walks along these trade corridors, not the reality that the people in Karachi created. If it's not invested in that, or if it's in some sort of intermediate reality, I hope that
limitierenden Diskurse
that the limiting discourse
of
the absolute intersectional claim that we have in this safe space, that we get a productive kind of friction. I hope this didn't, I hope it's not too high. Basically, what I want to say is that the form of exposing yourself is something as a counterweight to all these faults and also moments of colonization, of race, gender privilege, and all these questions that you addressed. Maybe like this. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions? Yes. I think we can take another question. One last one. Thank you, Johannes, for your contribution. I really admire your work. I've been admiring your work for years, how you have this system, this ecology of the identities and of entities as well. And I find it quite fascinating how Transformella or your various identities can exist within and be active within the Academy for Fine Arts. So at the end, we had a panel discussion with Cassie and Zoe, and so we thought about the different political platforms where we thought about and we discussed how how systemic criticism could work within an institution that itself needs to be updated. For example, art academies and art teaching institutions, and especially in cooperation with Tamara as well. It has a very specific form of dramaturgical work that we have here. That's what I would like to, if you could maybe expand on that a bit.
Ich hatte es ja schon angesprochen, wir haben
I addressed it before. We tried in the concept, we tried to do some things differently.
In den sonstigen Möglichkeitsraum der deutschen
from what's possible in German art academies. I have to say we were very lucky to start it from scratch. We could build a new house. In most cases, most of my colleagues didn't have that luck, that they could construct something completely new. It helped that it was a postgraduate course. And it's in this bachelor-master system within the art academy is something that's not quite as common. And it's not readable for German art academies, you know, so and kind of strange being anyway. So this gave us a lot of scope for updating and something and daring to update. I'm sitting here as the head of this study course and as an artist. But the credit to that goes to the Academy for daring to do this, the Academy, and Holger Felsen and Christian Starkemeyer and Peter Ock, Susanne Kühn, who was the head of the Academy just now, and the colleagues are here. Petra Meyer is here. She contributed a lot, and I'm glad. I'm really happy. I think it's super what a team we got together at the Academy to do this update, to work in concrete terms on an excessive labor that they're doing. It's an incredible number of little things that can be changed a little bit so that we can have a giant leap, and I hope that we can do this leap. But I can't really answer this question at the moment, because at the moment it's a vision, we're looking forward, and we don't really know whether this study course will be able to produce and to fulfill what I've been saying. There's a concept, there's a design, but so far it's only really the score.
I can just agree on what you said. It all sounds very promising, and I do wish you all the best and much success with that project and with the course of studies. And now we're going to finish up. We're going to wrap up this day. Thank you very much, Johannes, and we'll see you tomorrow. Now, before I let you all go, I think this was a very interesting day, but also a very tiring day. But before you can all go and escape from this dark cellar here, because we had some credits and thanks, I would also like to thank Ms. Christel Passmann, who was very active organizing this event. And I would also like to tell you that we are opening the exhibit Kein Schlussstrich, and it's going to start at 5. You can also, I'm going to invite you to the premiere of Jelinek. I'm not going to be able to go there myself, but I hope we see each other tomorrow at the very latest. Oh, there are no tickets anymore for No Closure. All right, okay, so see you tomorrow then.